They called her the weakest Luna, until the ancient wolf selected her. The howl that tore through the forest was not a call to hunt. It was a warning. Alara Voss dropped the bucket of water she was carrying and spun toward the tree line, her heart slamming against her ribs. The sound had come from the eastern ridge, the same direction where the pack's strongest warriors trained every morning before sunrise. No one howled like that unless something had gone wrong. She was 17, thin from years of eating last, and she had learned long ago that trouble in Crimson Moon territory always found its way to her doorstep, even when she had nothing to do with it. She wiped her hands on her worn tunic and ran toward the sound, ignoring the ache in her legs from hauling water since before dawn. By the time she reached the clearing, a crowd had already gathered. Pack members stood in a wide circle, their faces pale, their eyes fixed on something in the center of the grass. Alara pushed through the bodies, earning a shove from a boy named Ronan, who muttered under his breath that she did not belong there. She ignored him and kept moving until she saw what everyone else was staring at. A wolf lay in the center of the clearing, but it was unlike any wolf Alara had ever seen. Its fur held no single color. Silver threads shimmered through black, and when it breathed, faint lines of pale blue light traveled beneath its skin, like veins made of moonlight. It was larger than any wolf spirit she had heard of, larger even than the Alpha's own beast, and it was not moving. "It's real," someone whispered behind her. "The ancient wolf is real." Alara had grown up hearing the old stories, the way every pup in Crimson Moon Pack had. A century ago, a wolf spirit of impossible power had chosen a vessel, granted that vessel strength beyond imagination, and then vanished into legend when its chosen one died protecting the pack from a war that nearly wiped them out. The elders spoke of it the way people spoke of gods, a story to make children behave, not something anyone expected to see with their own eyes. But there it was, breathing in the grass, and every wolf in the clearing understood what its arrival meant. The ancient wolf had returned to choose again. Alpha Garrick Cross arrived moments later, flanked by his personal guard and his son, Damien. The crowd parted for them instantly, the way it always did. Damien was 18, broad-shouldered, and carried himself like someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. His eyes swept over the crowd with mild irritation until they landed on the wolf in the grass, and then even he went still. "Everyone stand back," Alpha Garrick ordered. His voice was low and commanding, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. "This is not a spectacle. This is a sacred event." The wolf's chest rose and fell slowly. Its eyes, when they finally opened, were the color of a winter sky, pale and endless. A murmur ran through the crowd as the beast lifted its massive head and looked, not at the Alpha, not at Damien, but past them, scanning the faces gathered at the edge of the clearing, as if searching for something specific. Alara felt a strange pull in her chest, like a string tightening somewhere behind her ribs, but she told herself it was nerves. She had felt strange sensations before, tiny flickers of something that never amounted to anything. Her wolf spirit had been declared the weakest ever recorded in Crimson Moon history, a fact the pack reminded her of constantly. She had no reason to believe this moment had anything to do with her. "The century trial," an elder murmured near the front of the crowd. An old woman named Bethan, who had served the pack for longer than anyone could remember. "It only happens once every 100 years. The ancient wolf sleeps, and when it wakes, it chooses a new vessel, a new Luna, if the vessel is worthy of the Alpha's bond." Damien's expression shifted, something calculating replacing his surprise. Every unmarked wolf in the pack understood what this meant for their future. Whoever the ancient wolf chose would receive power beyond anything a normal wolf spirit could offer, strength that could reshape the pack's standing among their rivals for another century. It would also, by tradition, be paired with the Alpha's heir as Luna, assuming the heir accepted the match. "We will hold the trial at sunset," Alpha Garrick announced, addressing the whole gathering. "Every eligible wolf, between the ages of 16 and 25, will present themselves in the central grounds. The ancient wolf will make its choice." The crowd erupted into excited chatter, already speculating on who would be chosen. Names were thrown around, all belonging to the pack's strongest fighters, the ones who had trained since childhood, who had already proven themselves in combat and in status. Alara heard her own name only once, spoken by a girl named Nadia, in a mocking tone. "At least we know it won't be her," Nadia said, glancing at Alara with a small, cruel smile. The weakest wolf in a century, chosen by the strongest spirit in a century? That would be a joke even the ancient wolf wouldn't tell. A few people laughed. Alara kept her face still, the way she had trained herself to do since she was a child. She had learned that showing pain only encouraged people like Nadia to dig deeper. She turned and walked away from the clearing before anyone could see the heat rising in her cheeks, leaving the water bucket forgotten on the grass behind her. She did not go far. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of the training grounds, close enough to hear the pack's continued excitement, but far enough to be alone with her thoughts. Being the daughter of a disgraced beta meant she had spent her whole life being watched, judged, and found lacking. Her father, Callan Voss, had once held one of the highest positions in the pack before a scandal stripped him of rank and left the family in quiet disgrace. Nobody ever explained to Alara exactly what had happened. She only knew that by the time she was old enough to understand pack politics, her family's name had already become something people said with a curl of their lip. Her wolf spirit had manifested weak, almost non-existent, when she turned 13, the age most wolves came into their first real strength. The pack healer had tested her 3 times, certain there had been a mistake, but the results never changed. Alara Voss carried the weakest wolf spirit ever recorded in Crimson Moon history. She had spent 4 years since then hauling water, mending clothes, and cleaning the training grounds, while wolves half as dedicated as she was trained for glory she would never touch. She told herself it did not matter anymore. She had built a quiet life around low expectations, a life where disappointment could not surprise her, because she never let herself hope for anything in the first place. But sitting on that log, listening to the pack debate, who among their golden warriors deserved to be chosen by a legend, something in her chest ached in a way she did not want to name. The sun began its slow descent as the hours passed, and the pack gathered again, this time in the central grounds, a wide circular clearing, surrounded by torches that had already been lit in preparation. Every eligible wolf stood in rows, dressed in their finest clothing, their postures straight with pride and anticipation. Alara stood at the very back, technically required to attend since attendance was mandatory for every eligible member of the pack, but certain that her presence meant nothing more than filling a space in the crowd. Alpha Garrick stood at the front beside the ancient wolf, which had recovered enough strength to stand on its own, though it still moved with a careful, deliberate slowness, as if testing the weight of its own body after 100 years of sleep. Its pale blue eyes swept over the assembled wolves one more time, and the entire clearing fell into a hush so complete that Alara could hear her own heartbeat. "The trial will proceed by lineage," an elder announced, reading from an old scroll. "Beginning with the highest-ranked families, each candidate will step forward and be assessed by the ancient wolf. One by one, the pack's most celebrated wolves stepped into the center of the clearing. Damien went first, as expected, standing tall and confident as the ancient wolf approached him, circled him once, and sniffed the air near his shoulder. For a moment, everyone held their breath, certain the legendary spirit would choose the alpha's own son, but the wolf simply turned away and moved to the next candidate without any visible reaction. Nadia went next, then a boy named Silas who had won every combat tournament since he was 14, then a dozen others whose names Alara barely registered because she had stopped truly listening. The ancient wolf approached each candidate the same way, circling, sniffing, studying, and then walking away with no sign of interest. As the ceremony continued, unease began to creep into the crowd. An hour passed, then 2. The rows of candidates thinned as each person was assessed and dismissed, and still, the ancient wolf had not made its choice. Alara stood near the back, watching the sun sink lower behind the trees, painting the sky in deep orange and violet. She assumed the trial would end without a chosen vessel, that perhaps the ancient wolf had woken for some other reason entirely, and the whole ceremony had been built on nothing but hope and old legend. She was already imagining slipping away unnoticed once the crowd began to disperse. Then the elder called the final names on the scroll, the lowest-ranked families in the pack, the ones nobody expected to matter. Alara's name was among them, tucked near the very end, and when it was called, a ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd. She felt her face grow hot as she stepped forward, aware of every eye following her, aware that people were already smiling at what they assumed would be a brief, meaningless formality, before the trial ended in disappointment for everyone. She walked to the center of the clearing, on legs that felt unsteady, refusing to let her expression show the humiliation burning under her skin. The ancient wolf had been standing near the alpha, its head low with what looked like exhaustion after a long evening of fruitless searching. When Alara stepped into the open space, the wolf lifted its head. Its ears rose. Its entire body went still. For a moment, nothing happened, and Alara almost turned to walk away, assuming the pause meant nothing at all. Then the ancient wolf moved, not with the slow, careful steps it had used with every other candidate, but in a sudden, fluid rush that closed the distance between them in seconds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alara froze, too startled to run, as the massive creature stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from its body. It lowered its head until its pale blue eyes were level with hers, and for the first time in her life, Alara felt truly seen, not judged, not measured against her family's disgrace or her weak wolf spirit, but seen, as if the creature standing before her understood something about her that she did not yet understand about herself. The wolf pressed its nose gently against her chest, directly over her heart, and a wave of warmth spread through her entire body, so intense, it forced a gasp from her lips. Light bloomed beneath her skin, pale and silver, tracing patterns up her arms and across her collarbone, the same glow that had shimmered beneath the ancient wolf's fur. The clearing erupted into chaos. "That's impossible," someone shouted. "It has to be a mistake," another voice cried, sharper, angrier. Alara barely heard them. Her ears were filled with a low, resonant hum that seemed to come from inside her own skull, ancient and vast, like a voice speaking a language she somehow understood without knowing the words. The ancient wolf pulled back, sat on its haunches, and let out a long, low sound that was not quite a howl and not quite a growl, but something in between, something final. It had made its choice. Alpha Garrick stepped forward, his face unreadable, staring at Alara, as if seeing her for the first time. Damien pushed through the crowd toward the center of the clearing, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something Alara could not name. The elders whispered urgently among themselves. Nadia stood frozen at the edge of the gathering, her earlier mockery replaced by open shock. Alara looked down at her own trembling hands, watching the faint silver light fade slowly beneath her skin, and understood that whatever her life had been until this moment, it would never be the same again. The pack that had called her the weakest Luna candidate in a century now stood in stunned silence around her, forced to reckon with a truth none of them had wanted to accept. The ancient wolf had chosen her, and nothing about that choice was a mistake. For a long moment, no one moved. The torches around the clearing crackled in the silence, casting flickering shadows across faces frozen in disbelief. Alara stood at the center of it all, the glow beneath her skin fading to nothing, leaving her looking exactly as she always had, thin and plain and unremarkable, except that everyone now stared at her as if she had grown a second head. Bethan, the old elder who had served the pack for decades, was the first to break the silence. She stepped forward slowly, her cane tapping against the packed earth, and studied Alara with an expression that mixed astonishment with something close to reverence. "In all my years," Bethan said quietly, though her voice carried across the hushed clearing, "I have never witnessed a bonding this fast." The ancient wolf did not hesitate. It did not test her the way it tested every other candidate. It simply knew. "That proves nothing," Nadia snapped, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She stepped forward, chin raised, refusing to accept what she had just seen with her own eyes. Look at her. She cannot even hold a training staff without dropping it. Her wolf spirit was declared the weakest in a century. This has to be some kind of error, some flaw in the ceremony. A few voices murmured in agreement, emboldened by Nadia's defiance. Alara felt the old, familiar sting of humiliation creeping back into her chest, but this time it was tangled with something new, a small, stubborn spark of anger that refused to let her shrink the way she usually did. "The ancient wolf does not make errors," Bethan said sharply, silencing the murmurs with a single look. "It has slept for a century, waiting for the one worth waking for. If you believe you understand its judgment better than the spirit itself, Nadia, you are welcome to test that belief. I would not recommend it." Nadia's mouth snapped shut, though her eyes remained hard as she glared at Alara from across the clearing. Alpha Garrick had not spoken since the bonding occurred. He studied Alara with the same calculating gaze he used when assessing threats to the pack, and for a moment, Alara wondered if he might simply reject the outcome entirely, declare it invalid, and send her back to her water buckets and mended clothes. As Alpha, he held the authority to challenge tradition if he believed the pack's future depended on it. Instead, he turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of command that silenced every remaining whisper. The ancient wolf's judgment has never been questioned in the history of this pack, and it will not be questioned tonight, he said. Whatever any of us expected, the choice has been made. Alara Voss is now bonded to the ancient wolf. She will be treated with the respect that bond demands. The words did little to erase the doubt on the faces around her, but they were enough to end the open challenges, at least for the moment. Alara caught Damien's eye across the clearing. He was staring at her with an expression she could not read, something between disbelief and quiet calculation, as if he were rearranging an entire mental map of the world to make room for a possibility he had never once considered. By tradition, the vessel chosen by the ancient wolf became the intended Luna to the Alpha's heir, a pairing meant to bind the pack's future strength to its future leadership. Alara understood the implication, even as her mind struggled to accept the rest of what had happened. She was not just bonded to a legendary spirit. She had, in the span of a single evening, become the pack's future Luna, standing beside a boy who had never spoken more than a handful of words to her in her entire life. Damien did not step forward to acknowledge the tradition. He simply turned and walked back toward his father's side, his jaw tight, saying nothing at all. Alara told herself the silence did not sting, though she was not entirely convinced. The elder continued the closing rites of the ceremony, her voice steady despite the tension still humming through the crowd. She explained that Alara would be moved into the quarters reserved for Luna candidates, that guards would be assigned to protect the newly bonded vessel until the pack fully accepted the transition, and that formal training would begin within the week to help Alara understand and control the power now living inside her. Alara barely absorbed any of it. Her mind kept circling back to the moment the ancient wolf had pressed its nose against her heart, the warmth that had spread through her body, the strange hum of understanding that still lingered faintly at the edge of her thoughts, like a voice speaking just beyond the range of hearing. As the crowd finally began to disperse, murmuring among themselves in tight clusters, Alara caught sight of her father standing near the edge of the clearing. Callan Voss had not spoken a single word throughout the entire ceremony. He watched his daughter now with an expression Alara had never seen on his face before, not the weary resignation he usually wore, but something closer to fear. She wanted to go to him, to ask why he looked so unsettled instead of proud, but two guards approached her before she could move, informing her in formal tones that she was to be escorted to her new quarters immediately for her own safety. She glanced back one more time as she was led away, but her father had already turned and disappeared into the crowd. The quarters reserved for Luna candidates were unlike anything Alara had ever lived in. The room was larger than the entire cottage she shared with her father, with a real bed instead of a thin mat on the floor, and windows that looked out over the training grounds where she had spent countless hours hauling water, while others trained for glory. She sat on the edge of the bed once the guards left her alone, staring at her own hands, waiting for the strange hum inside her mind to explain itself. It did not take long. "You have questions," a voice said, low and resonant, echoing not through the air, but somewhere deep inside her own thoughts. Alara went rigid, glancing around the empty room before realizing the voice belonged to the ancient wolf itself, speaking to her through the bond that now connected them. "You can talk," she said aloud, then immediately felt foolish for stating something so obvious. "I have always been able to speak," the voice replied, carrying a faint note of dry amusement beneath its ancient weight. "I simply had no one worth speaking to for a very long time." Alara swallowed hard, unsure how to respond to a legendary spirit addressing her directly inside her own mind. "Everyone thinks this is a mistake," she said finally. "My wolf spirit is the weakest ever recorded. I can't even hold a training staff properly. Why would you choose me over people who have trained their whole lives for exactly this moment?" The voice was silent for a long moment, long enough that Alara wondered if it had already withdrawn, retreating back into whatever quiet corner of her mind it usually occupied. Then it spoke again, softer this time, but no less certain. Strength is not the only thing worth choosing, child. I did not sleep for a century searching for the loudest wolf in the crowd. I searched for the one whose spirit had not broken, despite every reason it had to. Yours has been tested since the day you were born, and it has not broken. That is worth more than the strength of 1,000 warriors who have never once been tested at all. Alara felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, an emotion she had trained herself not to show in front of others for years, now surfacing in the privacy of an empty room, with no one but a voice inside her own head to witness it. They're going to make this hard, she whispered. The pack, Nadia. Maybe even Damien. Yes, the voice agreed simply, without softening the truth. They will. But you are no longer facing them alone. Outside her window, the torches of the training grounds burned low as the pack slowly settled for the night, though Alara doubted many of them would sleep easily after what they had witnessed. Somewhere beyond the walls of her new quarters, she knew whispers were already spreading through every corner of Crimson Moon territory, carrying the news to those who had not been present at the ceremony, and soon enough, to rival packs who would want to know exactly what had happened, and exactly how weak or strong this unexpected new vessel truly was. Alara lay back against the unfamiliar softness of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, the faint hum of the ancient wolf's presence settling into a steady, quiet rhythm at the edge of her thoughts. For the first time in years, she did not feel like the weakest person in the pack. She felt like someone standing at the very beginning of something enormous, something that would either destroy her completely or remake her into someone the pack could never again dismiss. She had no way of knowing, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that somewhere in the shadowed halls of the pack's council chambers, an old enemy of her family was already awake, already furious, and already planning exactly how to make sure the ancient wolf's choice never survived long enough to matter. Vera Ashworth stood at her window long after the rest of the pack had gone quiet, watching the candlelight flicker across the training grounds below. Her hands were folded behind her back, and her expression was calm, in a way that unsettled anyone who knew her well enough to recognize what that calm usually meant. She had sat on the pack council for over 20 years, respected for her sharp mind and her steady loyalty to tradition. Few remembered that her rise to power had come at the expense of another family, a family whose name had once been spoken with far more respect than her own. Fewer still remembered the exact details of how that had happened. The news of the ancient wolf's choice had reached her within the hour, carried by a breathless runner who could barely get the words out fast enough. Vera had listened without reaction, thanked the runner, and closed her door quietly, before allowing her expression to change. Now, alone in her chambers, her jaw was tight, and her eyes carried a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. Alara Voss. Of all the wolves in Crimson Moon Pack, the ancient wolf had chosen the daughter of Callan and Miriam Voss. Vera had spent 18 years believing that particular problem was permanently buried. She moved to her desk and pulled open a drawer, retrieving an old, folded piece of parchment she had kept hidden for nearly 2 decades. She did not need to read it. She knew every word written on it by memory, but she unfolded it anyway, studying the faded ink, as if it might offer some new answer to a problem she had thought long resolved. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She folded the parchment quickly and slid it back into the drawer, before calling for whoever waited outside to enter. A young man stepped in, one of the few pack members who answered to her directly, and asked no questions in return. "You wanted to be informed the moment the ceremony ended," he said. "I already know how it ended," Vera replied evenly. "What I want to know is how deeply the binding took hold. 18 years is a long time for a suppression this delicate to remain unnoticed. If it has begun to weaken on its own, that changes what I need to do next." The young man hesitated. "You think the girl's wolf spirit was never actually weak?" "I do not think it," Vera said. "I know it. Now the question is whether the ancient wolf's bond is strong enough to break what I built years ago, and if it is, whether anyone will live long enough to understand what that means." She dismissed him with a wave, and once the door closed again, she sat back down at her desk, staring at the closed drawer that held the truth she had spent 18 years protecting. Alara woke the next morning to a knock at her door, far more polite than any she had experienced in years. A young attendant informed her that breakfast was being prepared, and that she was expected to meet with the pack healer within the hour, to begin assessing the changes the bonding had caused. Alara dressed slowly, still adjusting to the unfamiliar softness of clothing that had not been mended a dozen times, and made her way down to the dining hall the attendant described. The moment she stepped into the room, conversation stopped. Wolves who had ignored her for years now watched her every movement, some with open curiosity, others with barely concealed resentment. She kept her chin up and took a seat near the far end of the table, doing her best to ignore the eyes tracking her across the room. They will grow accustomed to this eventually, the ancient wolf said inside her mind, its voice calm despite the tension Alara could feel radiating through the hall. Eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence, Alara murmured under her breath, earning a curious glance from the attendant nearby, who clearly had not heard the words meant only for the voice in her head. She had barely started eating when Damien entered the hall, flanked by two of his usual companions. Conversation dipped again as he crossed the room, though his expression remained unreadable as he took a seat several places down from Alara, close enough that ignoring each other entirely would have been awkward, far enough that no one could accuse them of behaving like the paired couple tradition now expected them to become. "You survived the night then," Damien said finally, not looking at her directly. "Did you expect otherwise?" "I expected someone to challenge the ancient wolf's decision before morning," he said. Several of the council members were furious. "My father spent most of the night convincing them not to act rashly." Alara set down her spoon, her appetite fading. "And what do you think? Do you believe the decision was a mistake?" Damien finally looked at her, his gaze sharp and evaluating, the same look he might give an opponent before a sparring match. "I think the ancient wolf has existed far longer than any of us, and has never once been wrong before. That does not mean I understand its reasoning. It also does not mean I am prepared to simply accept that the weakest wolf spirit in a century is now the most powerful vessel in the pack's history." "That makes two of us," Alara said quietly, surprising herself with the honesty of it. Something in Damien's expression shifted slightly, though he said nothing further, returning his attention to his meal as the hall slowly returned to its usual low hum of conversation. Alara studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to reconcile the boy who had ignored her existence for years with the boy who was now, according to tradition, expected to eventually stand beside her as Alpha and Luna. The pack healer, a stern woman named Priya, examined Alara thoroughly once breakfast ended, testing her reflexes, her strength, and the faint traces of silver light that still occasionally flickered beneath her skin when her emotions ran high. Priya's frown deepened with every test. "Your physical strength has not changed significantly since yesterday," Priya said, jotting notes onto a parchment, which is unusual given the intensity of the bonding. Typically, a Luna bonded to a spirit this powerful would show immediate physical transformation. "I suspect your body is still adjusting, or..." She trailed off, tapping her pen against the parchment thoughtfully. "Or what?" Alara asked. "Or something is resisting the bond from taking full effect," Priya said slowly, "as if some part of your own spirit has been trained, for a very long time, to stay small." Alara felt a chill run through her at the words, though she could not explain exactly why. She thought of the years spent being told her wolf spirit was the weakest ever recorded, the countless tests the pack healer before Priya had run when Alara was 13, all confirming the same disappointing result. She had never questioned those results. Why would she, when the evidence of her own weakness seemed to prove itself every day in the pack's treatment of her? "She is not wrong," the ancient wolf said quietly inside her mind, its tone carrying something Alara had not heard from it before, something close to caution. "There is a barrier inside you, old and carefully placed. I have been trying to dissolve it since the moment we bonded, but it resists more than it should for something built around a child's spirit." "What does that mean?" Alara whispered, forgetting Priya was still in the room, until the healer glanced up at her curiously. "It means we need to begin training immediately," Priya said, misunderstanding the question. "Whatever is happening inside you, the sooner we understand it, the safer you will be. A Luna vessel with an unstable bond is vulnerable, Alara, and after last night, every rival pack within 100 miles already knows the ancient wolf has chosen a new vessel. They will be curious. Some of them will be far more than curious." Alara left the healer's chambers with far more questions than she had arrived with, her mind circling back again and again to the strange caution in the ancient wolf's voice. Something had been placed inside her, something old, something deliberate. She thought again of her father's expression the night before, the fear on his face that had nothing to do with pride. She thought of Vera Ashworth, a name she barely knew, beyond a vague awareness that the woman held significant power on the Pack Council. She did not yet understand how deeply those two thoughts were connected, but as she made her way back toward her new quarters, she resolved to find her father as soon as she could, and ask him, plainly and directly, what exactly had happened to her family 18 years ago. She never got the chance that day. Guards intercepted her halfway across the training grounds, informing her that Alpha Garrick had called an emergency council meeting, and that her presence, as the newly bonded Luna vessel, was required immediately. Alara followed them toward the council chambers with a growing sense of unease, the ancient wolf's earlier words still echoing quietly in the back of her mind. The council chamber was tense when she arrived, a dozen elders seated around a long table, Alpha Garrick at its head, Damien standing near his father's side. Vera Ashworth sat among the elders, her expression composed and unreadable, though Alara noticed the way the woman's eyes tracked her the moment she entered the room, sharp and assessing, in a way that felt entirely different from simple curiosity. "Sit," Alpha Garrick said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "We have received word from the border. A scouting party, belonging to the Thornfield Pack, was seen near our territory this morning, closer than diplomatic protocol allows. Given the timing, I do not believe this is a coincidence. They know about the bonding," an elder said grimly. "They know," Garrick confirmed, "and they will not be the last pack to test our borders, now that word has spread. A vessel bonded to the ancient wolf represents a shift in power that every rival territory will want to understand, or exploit, before we have time to consolidate that strength." Alara's stomach tightened as every eye in the room turned toward her once again, this time carrying a weight far heavier than mockery or disbelief. She was no longer simply an outcast the pack had reluctantly accepted. She had become, in the span of a single day, a target that could draw danger to the entire pack's doorstep. "We will increase security around the Luna quarters immediately," Garrick continued, "and Alara's training will begin at once, under close supervision. Until her bond stabilizes and her strength becomes reliable, she remains vulnerable, and that vulnerability puts the entire pack at risk." Vera Ashworth spoke for the first time since Alara had entered the room, her voice smooth and measured. "A reasonable precaution, Alpha, though I would suggest we also consider whether the girl is prepared for the responsibility this bond demands. Power without proper foundation can be as dangerous as no power at all." Something in the woman's tone made the back of Alara's neck prickle, though she could not have explained exactly why. It sounded, on the surface, like simple caution. Underneath it, Alara sensed something colder, something far more deliberate. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing patrol schedules, defensive positions, and formal announcements to be sent to neighboring packs confirming the bonding, while making clear that Crimson Moon Pack would defend its new Luna vessel with full force. Alara said little, absorbing the sudden reality that her life, already upended in a single evening, had now become entangled with matters of war and territory she barely understood. As the council meeting ended and the elders filed out, Alara caught sight of her father waiting near the chamber doors, having apparently been summoned as well, though he had not been permitted to speak during the meeting itself. His face was pale, and when their eyes met, he offered her a small, strained smile that did nothing to ease the growing unease in her chest. "We need to talk," Alara said quietly, falling into step beside him as they left the chamber. "About what happened 18 years ago. About whatever it is Vera Ashworth doesn't want me to know." Her father's steps faltered slightly, though he recovered quickly, glancing around the corridor to ensure no one else was close enough to overhear. "Not here," he said, his voice low. "There are things about your mother, and about why your wolf spirit was declared weak, that I should have told you years ago. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. Now I am beginning to think staying silent was the greater danger." Before Alara could press him further, a commotion erupted from the direction of the pack's outer gates, shouts, and the sound of running feet echoing down the corridor toward them. A guard burst through the entrance moments later, breathless and alarmed. "Alpha Cross," the guard called out, spotting Damien nearby. "There's been an incursion at the northern boundary. Unknown wolves, moving fast, heading toward the Luna quarters." Alara's blood went cold. Whatever answers her father had been about to give her would have to wait. Something dangerous had already found its way to Crimson Moon territory, and it was coming directly for her. Damien was already moving before the guard finished speaking, barking orders to nearby warriors with the calm efficiency of someone who had trained his entire life for exactly this kind of moment. Seal the inner gates. Get archers to the eastern wall. I want a perimeter around the Luna quarters within 2 minutes. What about her? One of the warriors asked, glancing at Alara. She comes with me, Damien said, already reaching for Alara's arm before she could object. If they're moving toward the Luna quarters, she's safer away from there, not inside it. Alara's father caught her other arm briefly, his grip tight with fear. Be careful, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had rarely heard from him. Please, Alara. Whatever happens tonight, be careful. There was no time to ask him what he meant. Damien pulled her forward, moving quickly through the corridors toward the training grounds, shouting further instructions to the warriors, falling into formation around them. Alara's heart pounded against her ribs, equal parts fear and confusion, as the sound of distant howling rose from beyond the pack's outer walls, sharp and urgent, unlike any call she recognized from her own pack. They are testing your defenses, the ancient wolf said inside her mind, its voice steady, despite the chaos unfolding around them. A small group, likely scouts rather than a full attack force. They want to see how quickly Crimson Moon responds, and whether the newly bonded vessel is as vulnerable as they hope. That's comforting, Alara muttered, earning a sharp glance from Damien, who clearly had not expected her to be speaking to someone only she could hear. Is it talking to you right now? He asked, his tone somewhere between curiosity and disbelief, even as he kept moving, guiding her toward a defensible position near the center of the training grounds, where a dozen warriors were already gathering. It says they're scouts, Alara said, testing us. Damien's jaw tightened. Then we make sure they regret it. The warriors around them fell into a tight formation, as more howls echoed from the tree line beyond the outer wall, closer now, circling rather than advancing directly, exactly as a scouting party testing defenses might behave. Torches flared to life across the training grounds, casting long shadows that danced and shifted with every gust of wind. Alara stood at the center of it all, acutely aware that she had gone from hauling water buckets to standing at the heart of a potential attack in the span of a single day, her body humming with a strange, unfamiliar energy that seemed to be gathering strength the longer the danger lingered. A shape burst from the tree line at the edge of the clearing, moving fast and low, and the warriors around Alara tensed as one, weapons raised, eyes locked on the intruder cutting through the darkness toward them. The shape resolved into a lone wolf, gray-furred and lean, moving with the controlled speed of a trained scout rather than a mindless attacker. It skidded to a halt several yards from the assembled warriors, shifting mid-motion into human form, a young man in dark travel clothes with his hands raised slowly to show he carried no weapon. I come under a flag of parley, the man called out, his voice tense but steady. I am not here to fight. My name is Farid, and I speak for the Thornfield Pack. Damien did not lower his guard. Parley does not usually involve scouting parties circling our northern boundary at night. That was not sanctioned by our Alpha, Farid said quickly. A group of our younger warriors decided to test your defenses without authorization. They wanted to see the strength of the vessel the ancient wolf chose. I was sent to stop them before this became something neither of our packs wants. As if summoned by his words, 3 more shapes burst from the tree line. Wolves considerably larger and more aggressive than Farid had been, moving with clear hostile intent, rather than diplomatic caution. Farid's expression twisted with alarm. They didn't listen, he said, backing away. I tried to warn you. The warriors around Alara surged forward to meet the charging wolves, and the training grounds erupted into controlled chaos, snarls and shouted commands cutting through the night air. Alara stumbled backward as Damien shifted in a single fluid motion, his human form dissolving into a powerful wolf that leapt to intercept the nearest attacker before it could reach the warriors defending the perimeter. Alara had never actually witnessed real combat before, only sparring matches during training sessions she was never allowed to participate in. The reality was faster and more brutal than anything she had imagined, bodies colliding with bone-jarring force, teeth flashing in the torchlight, the air filled with growls and the sharp scent of blood. One of the attacking wolves broke free from the warriors trying to contain it and turned directly toward Alara, its eyes locked on her with unmistakable purpose. It was larger than the others, its fur a deep, mottled brown, and it moved with a speed that told her immediately she would not be able to outrun it. Alara. The ancient wolf's voice cut through her panic, sharp and commanding in a way it had not been before. Stop trying to run. You cannot outrun what is already inside you. Trust the bond. I don't know how, Alara gasped, backing away as the wolf closed the distance, its powerful muscles coiling for a final lunge. Then let me show you. The warmth that had spread through Alara's body during the bonding ceremony returned in an instant, far more intense this time, flooding through her veins like liquid fire. The world seemed to slow around her as the attacking wolf leapt, jaws open, and Alara moved without conscious thought, her body responding with a speed and precision that belonged to someone else entirely, someone stronger, someone who had never once been called weak. She sidestepped the leaping wolf with impossible grace, her hand shooting out to catch it by the scruff mid-air, with a strength that should have been physically impossible for her thin frame. The wolf yelped in surprise as she redirected its momentum, slamming it into the ground with enough force to knock the fight out of it instantly. Silver light traced up her arms, brighter than before, and for a moment, her eyes reflected the same pale blue glow that belonged to the ancient wolf itself. The training grounds fell into stunned silence, as every combatant, friend, and enemy alike paused to stare at what had just happened. The mottled brown wolf whimpered and scrambled backward, no longer interested in continuing the fight, and the remaining attackers exchanged uncertain glances before beginning a hasty, disorganized retreat toward the tree line. Alara stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard, staring down at her own glowing hands, as the adrenaline of the moment slowly began to fade. The strength was already receding, the warmth cooling back into the familiar, unremarkable feeling of her ordinary body, but the memory of what had just happened remained vivid and undeniable. Damien shifted back into human form nearby, staring at her with an expression that had shifted entirely from the guarded neutrality he usually wore. Several of the warriors who had spent years dismissing her as the weakest wolf in the pack now looked at her with something close to awe, mixed with a healthy dose of confusion. Farid, the scout who had tried to warn them, remained at the edge of the clearing, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "That is not a weak vessel," he murmured, mostly to himself, before turning and disappearing into the tree line after his retreating pack members. Alpha Garrick arrived moments later, flanked by additional guards, taking in the scene with a sharp, assessing gaze. His eyes moved from the fleeing attackers to Alara, standing steady in the center of the clearing, despite everything that had just happened. "Report," he said sharply, addressing Damien. "A rogue scouting party from Thornfield," Damien said, his voice still carrying traces of the shock Alara had seen on his face moments earlier. "Unsanctioned by their alpha, according to one of their own scouts. They wanted to test Alara's strength directly." He paused, glancing at her again. "They found out more than they bargained for." Garrick studied Alara for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "It seems the ancient wolf's judgment continues to prove itself," he said finally. "Have the healers check everyone for injuries, and increase patrols along the northern boundary immediately. If Thornfield's rogue warriors reported back what they witnessed tonight, our neighbors will know precisely how much power now resides within our territory. That knowledge cuts both ways." As the warriors dispersed to tend to the wounded and secure the boundary, Alara found herself standing alone at the edge of the clearing, exhaustion settling heavily over her now that the surge of strength had faded completely. Her legs felt unsteady, and a dull ache had begun spreading through muscles she had never used so intensely before. "You did well," a voice said beside her, and she turned to find Damien standing there, his expression cautious but no longer dismissive. "I didn't do anything," Alara said honestly. "The ancient wolf did all of it. I just happened to be standing there." "That's not entirely true," Damien said. "The bond amplifies what already exists within you. It cannot create strength from nothing. Whatever power moved through you tonight, it belongs to you, as much as it belongs to the spirit you're bonded with." He paused, studying her with new consideration. "I underestimated you. I think most of us did." It was not quite an apology, but it was more acknowledgement than Alara had received from Damien in the entire time she had known him, and she found herself unexpectedly grateful for it, even as exhaustion made it difficult to fully appreciate the moment. "You handled that well, for a first encounter," the ancient wolf said inside her mind, as she made her way slowly back toward her quarters, Damien walking a careful distance beside her, apparently unwilling to leave her unescorted after the night's events. "Though I suspect this will not be the last test we face together. Word of tonight will travel quickly, and not every pack that hears it will react with retreat." "Wonderful," Ilara murmured under her breath. "Something to look forward to." "I did not choose you because your life would be easy, Ilara. I chose you because you have never once let difficulty destroy you. That will matter more in the days ahead than you currently understand." As they crossed the training grounds, Ilara noticed her father standing near the edge of the pathway, having clearly waited anxiously through the entire confrontation. His relief at seeing her unharmed was visible even in the dim torchlight, though the fear she had noticed earlier had not entirely disappeared from his expression. "We need to talk," Ilara said again, more firmly this time, as Damien offered a quiet nod and stepped back to give them privacy, though he remained close enough to keep watch. "Tonight, Father, whatever you've been afraid to tell me, I need to hear it now, especially after what just happened." Callan Voss glanced around the training grounds, checking for anyone close enough to overhear, before finally nodding. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Not here. Somewhere private." He led her away from the main pathway toward the small cottage at the edge of the pack's territory that had been their home for as long as Ilara could remember, the modest space feeling strange to return to now after a single night spent in the far more spacious Luna quarters. Once inside, Callan bolted the door behind them and lit a single candle, its flickering light casting long shadows across the familiar worn furniture. "Your mother," he began slowly, sitting heavily in his usual chair, "was not simply a pack member who fell out of favor, Ilara. Miriam was being considered as a Luna candidate herself, many years ago, before you were born. She had a wolf spirit of remarkable strength, strong enough that many believed she would one day stand beside the Alpha as Luna." Ilara sat across from him, hardly daring to breathe as she listened, pieces of a story she had never been told slowly beginning to take shape. "What happened to her?" she asked quietly. Her father's hands tightened around the arms of his chair. "There was another candidate at the time, a woman, who saw your mother's strength as a direct threat to her own ambitions within the pack. I did not understand the full extent of what she was capable of until it was far too late." He paused, his expression darkening with old grief. "Your mother died when you were very young, Ilara. You know this. What you do not know is that her death was not the accident we always told you it was." The candle flickered as a draft slipped beneath the door, and Ilara felt a cold weight settling in her chest, heavier than anything the night's battle had left behind. "Who was she?" Ilara asked, though some part of her had already begun to suspect the answer, the name hovering at the edge of her thoughts since the council meeting earlier that day. Her father met her eyes, and the fear she had seen in him since the moment the ancient wolf chose her finally found its full shape in his answer. "Vera Ashworth," he said quietly, "the woman who now sits on the pack council, advising the Alpha on matters of tradition and caution. The same woman who watched you walk into that council chamber today, knowing exactly who your mother was, and knowing, I believe, far more about your own suppressed wolf spirit than she has ever let anyone else discover." Ilara sat frozen, trying to absorb the weight of what her father had just told her. "You think she had something to do with Mother's death," she said slowly. "And you think she did something to me as well. That's why my wolf spirit was declared weak. Someone did this to me on purpose." Callan nodded, his expression heavy with years of guilt he had clearly carried in silence. "Your mother discovered, near the end of her life, that Vera had been quietly undermining every rival candidate for the Luna position for years, spreading false rumors, manipulating council votes, even tampering with training records, to make certain no one else could rise as quickly as she did. Your mother confronted her privately, believing that exposing the truth to the Alpha at the time would be enough to stop her. It wasn't enough, Ilara guessed quietly. "No," her father said. "Miriam died less than a month later, during what was reported as a routine border patrol gone wrong. I never believed that story, not for a single day, but I had no proof, and accusing a rising council member of murder without evidence would have destroyed our family even faster than staying silent did. I made a choice to protect you instead of pursuing justice for her, and I have questioned that choice every single day since. And the binding? Alara pressed. You think Vera did something to my wolf spirit too? Her father's hands trembled slightly as he continued. You were barely more than a toddler when your mother died. Within a year, strange things began happening around our home. Small objects moved when no one was near them. You would wake screaming some nights, though you never remembered why. I did not understand it at the time, and I was too consumed by grief to investigate properly. It was not until you turned 13, and your wolf spirit manifested at a strength so far below normal that even the healers were baffled, that I began to suspect someone had deliberately suppressed it, likely years earlier, to ensure you would never grow strong enough to threaten Vera's position, or draw attention to what had truly happened to your mother. Alara felt sick, the pieces of her entire childhood rearranging themselves into a shape far darker than she had ever imagined. Every humiliation, every mocking comment about her weakness, every year spent believing there was something fundamentally lacking in her, had potentially been engineered by a woman sitting comfortably on the pack council, advising the Alpha, as though she had never done anything wrong in her life. Your father speaks the truth, the ancient wolf said quietly inside her mind, its voice carrying a weight Alara had not heard from it before, something close to old, simmering anger. I told you earlier that a barrier existed inside you, old and deliberately placed. I did not want to burden you with speculation before you had confirmation, but I have suspected since the moment we bonded that what was done to you was no accident of nature. It was an act of cruelty, disguised as misfortune. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Alara asked her father, her voice cracking slightly despite her effort to keep it steady. All these years, watching me get mocked, watching me believe I was worthless, and you knew there might be a reason for it that had nothing to do with me at all? I was afraid, Callan admitted, his voice breaking. Afraid that if I spoke the truth aloud, Vera would finish what she started with your mother. I told myself I was protecting you by staying quiet, by letting you believe the simpler, safer story. I see now how much that silence cost you, and I am sorrier than I know how to say. Alara sat with the anger and grief tangled together in her chest, unsure which one to reach for first. Part of her wanted to storm directly to the council chambers and confront Vera Ashworth immediately, to demand answers, to make the woman face the truth in front of the entire pack. Another part of her, quieter but no less insistent, recognized that acting rashly with no proof would accomplish nothing except revealing that she now knew enough to be dangerous, which would only make Vera more careful, more ruthless, in whatever she chose to do next. We need proof, Alara said finally, forcing herself to think clearly, despite the storm of emotion still churning inside her. Real proof, not just suspicion and old grief. If she's as careful as you say, she won't have left anything obvious behind. Her father studied her, with something like pride, breaking through the guilt still etched across his features. Your mother would be proud to hear you say that, he said quietly. She always believed patience was more dangerous than anger, when wielded correctly. He is not wrong, the ancient wolf added. And now that we understand there is a barrier within you placed with deliberate intent, I believe I can help you find a way to dissolve it, carefully, without alerting whoever placed it there in the first place. If your full strength emerges gradually, rather than all at once, we may be able to uncover the truth before Vera realizes how much ground she has already lost. Alara nodded slowly, a new resolve settling over her exhaustion and grief. She thought of the years spent believing herself weak, the humiliation she had swallowed silently because she had no reason to doubt what everyone told her about herself. She thought of her mother, a woman she barely remembered, who had apparently possessed enough strength and courage to challenge a manipulative rival directly, and who had paid for that courage with her life. All right, Alara said, standing from her chair despite the exhaustion still weighing on her limbs. Then we do this carefully. We find the proof, and when we have it, Vera Ashworth answers for everything she's done, to my mother, and to me. Her father rose as well, pulling her into a brief, tight embrace that carried 18 years of unspoken apology within it. Be careful, he said again, echoing his earlier warning from before the battle. Vera has spent 2 decades building her position within this pack. She will not surrender it easily, and she will not hesitate to protect it by whatever means necessary. As Alara finally made her way back toward the Luna quarters later that night, escorted quietly by Damien, who had waited patiently outside her father's cottage, without asking questions about what had clearly been an intense and private conversation, she found herself looking at the pack's torch-lit paths and quiet buildings with new eyes. Somewhere within these walls, a woman she had barely known existed until that day had shaped the entire trajectory of her life through an act of hidden cruelty, and had done so while maintaining a public reputation built on wisdom and caution. Alara did not yet know how she would find the proof she needed, or how long it would take before Vera Ashworth realized that the barrier she had built so carefully was finally, slowly, beginning to crack. But as she settled into her bed that night, the ancient wolf's steady presence humming quietly at the edge of her thoughts, she understood with complete certainty that the fight ahead of her would not be decided on any training ground or battlefield. It would be decided in the shadows, where secrets 18 years old were finally beginning to surface. Across the training grounds, in the same chambers where she had studied the old parchment hours earlier, Vera Ashworth remained awake long past midnight, unable to shake the unease that had settled over her since watching Alara walk out of the council meeting with her father close behind. She had trained herself over 2 decades to read faces, to notice the smallest shift in posture or expression that revealed what someone was truly thinking, and Callan Voss's face, when their eyes had briefly met in the corridor, had carried a look she recognized far too well. It was the look of a man who had finally decided silence was no longer worth the cost. She rose from her desk and crossed to the window, watching the distant lights of the Luna quarters where Alara now slept, unaware of exactly how carefully she was being watched. The reports from the northern boundary had already reached her, describing in vivid detail how the supposedly weakest wolf spirit in the pack's history had thrown a fully grown attacker to the ground, with strength no untrained vessel should have possessed, after only a single day of bonding. The barrier was weakening faster than she had anticipated. Vera had built the suppression with painstaking care when Alara was still a small child, too young to understand what was happening to her, weaving it into the girl's developing spirit slowly, gently, so that it would never register as anything other than natural weakness rather than deliberate interference. It had held for 18 years without a single crack, a testament to how carefully she had done her work. She had not accounted for the possibility that a spirit as ancient and powerful as the legendary wolf itself might exist, might wake after a century of dormancy, and might choose, of all the strong and celebrated candidates available, the one vessel whose true strength had been hidden most deliberately. It was, she thought bitterly, almost a cruel irony. The very act she had used to protect her position had marked Alara as exactly the kind of resilient, unbroken spirit the ancient wolf apparently valued above raw, untested strength. She could not undo what had already happened. The bonding was complete, publicly witnessed by the entire pack, impossible to challenge without inviting exactly the kind of scrutiny she had spent 2 decades avoiding. But she could still control how quickly the truth surfaced, and she could still ensure that if Callan Voss finally found the courage to speak openly about what he suspected, no one would believe him without solid proof she intended to make certain never existed. She returned to her desk and unlocked a second drawer, this one hidden beneath a false bottom that had taken considerable skill to construct years earlier. Inside lay a small collection of items she had kept as precautions rather than trophies: a lock of hair taken carefully from Alara as an infant, several pages of notes documenting the binding ritual in her own careful handwriting, and a single vial of dark liquid that had played its own quiet role in ensuring Miriam Voss never lived long enough to challenge her rise within the pack. Destroying this evidence now would be the safest path, and yet Vera hesitated, staring at the collection, with an expression that mixed calculation with something almost like nostalgia for the careful, patient work she had put into building the life she now enjoyed. She had not survived and thrived within Crimson Moon Pack's political landscape by acting rashly, and she was not about to start now, not when a more elegant solution remained available. If Alara Voss was destined to become a problem, there were far more effective ways to eliminate a problem than simply hoping old secrets stayed buried forever. Vera closed the drawer slowly, her mind already turning toward the next council meeting, toward the alliances she had spent years cultivating with rival packs for exactly this kind of contingency, toward the quiet, patient work of ensuring that whatever strength the ancient wolf had granted its unlikely new vessel It would not be enough to survive whatever came next. Outside her window, the torches along the training grounds burned low, and somewhere beyond the pack's borders, in territories neither Alara nor her father yet understood the danger of, word of the ancient wolf's unexpected choice continued to spread, carrying with it the attention of enemies far more patient and far more dangerous than a handful of rogue scouts testing unfamiliar defenses in the dark. Morning arrived far too quickly for Alara's exhausted body, but she forced herself out of bed anyway, aware that whatever had happened the night before, life within Crimson Moonpack showed no sign of slowing down to accommodate her need for rest. An attendant informed her that Alpha Garrick had assigned Damien to personally oversee her training, a decision that had apparently caused quiet murmurs throughout the pack, given the tradition surrounding their expected future pairing. She found Damien waiting for her at the edge of the training grounds when she arrived, dressed for combat practice, his expression carrying none of the dismissiveness he had shown her for years. Whatever had shifted in him during the previous night's confrontation appeared to have settled into something more permanent. "My father believes I'm the best suited to help you understand what happened last night," Damien said as she approached, "since I was the only one close enough to witness exactly how the bond responds under pressure. I suspect he also wants to see how well we work together, given the expectations everyone seems to have about our future." "Do you have opinions about those expectations?" Alara asked, unable to help herself. Damien's expression flickered, with something almost like amusement. "I think we should focus on keeping you alive first, and worry about pack traditions once that's no longer in question." It was a fair answer, and Alara found herself relaxing slightly as they began, Damien walking her through basic combat stances she had never been permitted to properly learn during her years of pack duties. Her body remembered almost nothing from the burst of strength the previous night had granted her, moving with the same untrained clumsiness she had always possessed, and after several failed attempts to mirror even simple movements, frustration began creeping into her voice. "This isn't working," she said, lowering her arms after stumbling through yet another basic stance. "Last night I threw a grown wolf to the ground without even thinking about it. Now, I can't even hold a proper defensive position." "That's because last night, the ancient wolf's power moved through you, in response to a direct threat," Damien said, studying her with the careful attention of someone genuinely trying to understand a problem, rather than simply criticizing. "Instinct and adrenaline can access strength that conscious effort alone cannot. We need to find a way to bridge that gap, so you're not relying entirely on moments of crisis to access what's actually yours." "He is correct," the ancient wolf offered quietly, "though there is more to it than instinct alone. The barrier your father spoke of last night still resists full access to your strength during calm moments. It is only under intense pressure that the bond can push past what was suppressed." Alara relayed this information to Damien, watching his expression sharpen with interest, rather than the skepticism she half expected. "A barrier," he repeated slowly. "You're saying someone deliberately suppressed your wolf spirit?" "I have reason to believe so," Alara said carefully, not yet ready to share the full details of what her father had told her, even with Damien's shifting attitude toward her. Trust, she had learned over 17 years of disappointment, needed to be earned slowly, not handed out simply because someone had finally decided to treat her with basic decency. Damien studied her for a long moment, clearly sensing there was more to the story than she was willing to share, but he did not press further. "That would explain a great deal," he said instead. "The healers were baffled by your test results for years. A weakness that severe, appearing so consistently across multiple examinations, should have shown some kind of physical or medical explanation. If it was suppression rather than genuine weakness, the inconsistency finally makes sense." They continued training through the morning, Damien adjusting his approach once he understood the nature of the problem, focusing less on teaching Alara traditional combat forms and more on helping her recognize the subtle sensations that accompanied moments when her true strength attempted to surface. It was slow, frustrating work, filled with far more failures than successes, but by midday, Alara noticed small changes she had not expected. Her reflexes sharpened slightly during sparring exercises. Her grip strength, tested against a training post, showed measurable improvement over her baseline the day before. "The barrier is definitely weakening," Damien observed, watching her successfully block a slow, deliberate strike for the third time in a row. "Whatever caused it, the bond seems to be actively working against it." "It is a slow process," the ancient wolf confirmed, but a steady one. What took years to build cannot be dissolved in a single day, not without risking damage to the very spirit it was meant to suppress. Patience will serve you better than force here, Alara. They broke for a midday meal, sitting together at the edge of the training grounds rather than returning to the crowded dining hall, and Alara found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, having something close to an easy conversation with someone her own age. Damien asked careful questions about what the bond felt like, genuinely curious rather than simply making conversation, and Alara found herself answering more openly than she had intended, describing the strange hum of the ancient wolf's presence, the warmth that flooded through her during moments of danger, the surprising clarity of its voice inside her own mind. "What's it like?" she asked eventually, turning the conversation. "Growing up as the Alpha's heir? Everyone always assumed your life was easy, but I imagine there's pressure in that too." Damien was quiet for a moment, considering the question with more seriousness than Alara expected. "Different pressure," he said finally. "Everyone expects perfection from someone destined to lead. I've spent my entire life being told what I should want, who I should become, what kind of Luna I should eventually choose. No one ever asked whether the version of leadership I was being trained for actually matched who I wanted to be." He paused, glancing sideways at her. "I think that's part of why I struggled so much with accepting the ancient wolf's choice yesterday. Not because I doubted your worth, though I'll admit I did initially. It was more that the choice was made for both of us, the same way everything else in my life has been decided by people who assumed they knew better than I did what I actually needed." It was a more honest admission than Alara had expected from him, and she found herself reconsidering the assumptions she had made about Damien over the years, assumptions built entirely from a distance, from watching him move through the pack surrounded by admirers and expectations she had never bothered to look past. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I never asked for any of this either. I spent 4 years building a life around the assumption that I would never matter to anyone in this pack beyond the work I could do. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else yet." Damien studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful passing behind his eyes. "Maybe that's something we figure out together then," he said, instead of letting everyone else's expectations decide it for us. Their training resumed after the meal, and as the afternoon wore on, Alara noticed the shift in how the other pack members watched their sessions from a distance. The mockery that had followed her for years had not entirely disappeared, but it had grown quieter, more uncertain, replaced increasingly by cautious curiosity, as word of the previous night's confrontation continued spreading throughout the pack. Nadia appeared near the edge of the training grounds during one of their breaks, watching with an expression that mixed grudging acknowledgement with lingering resentment. She did not approach directly, but she did not offer any of her usual mockery either, simply observing for several minutes before turning and walking away without a word. Alara understood, watching her go, that not every hostility she had faced over the years would dissolve simply because her strength had finally been revealed. Some grudges ran deeper than facts alone could resolve. As evening approached, Damien called an end to their session, both of them exhausted from hours of focused training. Alara's muscles ached in ways she had never experienced, but beneath the exhaustion, she felt something unfamiliar and quietly satisfying, a sense of genuine progress, rather than the hollow busyness of her old pack duties. "Same time tomorrow," Damien said as they walked back toward the central grounds together. "The barrier won't dissolve overnight, but I think we made real progress today." "Thank you," Alara said, meaning it more sincerely than she expected, "for actually trying to understand this, instead of just assuming you already knew everything about me the way most of the pack does." Damien's expression turned thoughtful again. "I think I owe you more than a single day of effort, Alara, given how many years I spent not bothering to look past what everyone else said about you." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, I don't think you're the same person the pack has spent years dismissing. I don't think you ever were." They parted ways near the central grounds, Damien heading toward the council chambers for an evening briefing with his father, Alara making her way slowly back toward the Luna quarters, her mind turning over everything the day had revealed, not just about her own gradually returning strength, but about the boy she had once assumed she knew everything worth knowing about. "You are surprised by him," the ancient wolf observed, as she settled into her quarters for the night, the words carrying a faint note of amusement. "I didn't expect him to actually care about understanding any of this," Alara admitted. "I spent years assuming he barely knew I existed." People often reveal themselves most clearly, not in comfortable moments, but in moments that force them to choose between old assumptions and new evidence, the ancient wolf said. Damien chose to look closer, rather than retreat into what was familiar and easy to believe. That is not nothing, Alara, particularly for someone raised to expect the world to simply align itself with his existing expectations. Alara lay back against her bed, staring up at the ceiling as she had the night before, though the storm of emotions churning through her now felt different from the overwhelming fear and confusion of that first evening. Beneath the exhaustion and the lingering weight of everything her father had revealed the previous night, she felt something she had not expected to feel again, so soon after discovering the truth about her suppressed strength and her mother's hidden death. She felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, something close to hope. Tomorrow would bring more training, more careful work toward dissolving the barrier Vera Ashworth had built inside her so many years ago, and eventually, Alara knew, it would bring a reckoning neither she nor the woman responsible for her suffering could avoid forever. But tonight, for just a little while, she allowed herself to simply rest in the quiet satisfaction of a day spent proving, gradually and steadily, that everything the pack had once believed about her had been built on a lie. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts sometime later, and Alara rose to find an attendant she did not recognize standing outside, holding a small wooden box tied with a plain ribbon. "A gift," the attendant said, "sent anonymously, congratulating you on your bonding. It was left at the front gate this evening." Alara accepted the box cautiously, an unease she could not immediately explain settling over her as she carried it back inside and set it on her small writing desk. She untied the ribbon slowly and lifted the lid, revealing a delicate silver bracelet nestled inside dark velvet, finely crafted, clearly expensive, the kind of gift that suggested significant thought and resources. "Do not touch it," the ancient wolf said sharply, its voice cutting through her curiosity with an urgency that made her freeze with her fingers still hovering above the box. "Why not?" Alara asked, pulling her hand back regardless. "Something about it feels wrong. I cannot explain it more precisely than that, but every instinct within me recognizes danger in that object. Close the box, and do not wear it under any circumstances." Alara did as instructed, closing the lid carefully and stepping back from the desk, as though the bracelet itself might strike out at her. She thought immediately of her father's warnings, of Vera Ashworth's careful, patient cruelty described in such vivid detail the night before, and a chill spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the evening air drifting through her window. She considered simply discarding the box, throwing it into the nearest fire, and forgetting it had ever arrived, but something in her hesitated. If the ancient wolf sensed genuine danger within it, then the bracelet itself might hold proof of exactly the kind of deliberate harm her father suspected Vera capable of inflicting. Destroying it now might mean destroying evidence she could not afford to lose. Instead, she wrapped the box carefully in a spare cloth and hid it at the bottom of a chest near her bed, resolving to bring it to Priya, the pack healer, the following morning, for careful examination. If the bracelet had been treated with something dangerous, a substance meant to weaken or poison whoever wore it, Priya would have the knowledge to identify it safely. Sleep did not come easily that night. Alara lay awake far longer than she wanted, staring at the hidden chest across the room, turning over the unsettling reality that whoever had sent the gift clearly knew where she was staying, understood pack customs well enough to disguise a threat as a celebratory offering, and had moved with a boldness that suggested they were not particularly worried about being caught. "Whoever sent this," the ancient wolf said quietly, as Alara finally began drifting toward an uneasy sleep, "wanted you to wear something dangerous close to your skin, trusting that the excitement of your new position would make you careless. That is not the mistake of a rushed or panicked enemy, Alara. That is the calculated patience of someone who has done this kind of thing before, and who expects to succeed again." The words followed Alara into her dreams, tangling with fragmented images of her mother's face. A face she barely remembered clearly enough to recognize outside of old, faded memories, and the cold, composed expression of a woman she had met only once, seated calmly at a council table, watching her with eyes that gave nothing away except patience, and the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided exactly how this story was supposed to end. Priya's expression turned grave the moment Alara unwrapped the hidden bracelet on the examination table the following morning. well before the healer even touched the delicate silver object resting inside its velvet lining. "Where did this come from?" Priya asked, already reaching for a pair of thin gloves before allowing her bare skin anywhere near the piece. "An anonymous gift," Elara said, watching closely as the healer lifted the bracelet with careful precision and held it beneath a beam of morning light streaming through the chamber window. "Left at the front gate last night. The ancient wolf warned me not to touch it directly." "A wise warning," Priya murmured, turning the bracelet slowly, examining the fine engravings along its surface with narrowed eyes. She retrieved a small vial of clear liquid from a nearby shelf and dabbed a single drop onto the metal's surface. Almost instantly, a faint discoloration spread across the silver, a sickly greenish tint that had not been visible before. "Nightbane root," Priya said grimly, setting the bracelet down and stripping off her gloves with visible relief. "Ground into a paste and worked into the metal itself, likely applied to the inner surface where it would sit directly against skin. It's slow-acting, difficult to detect in small doses, and devastating in its effects. Prolonged skin contact would have caused gradual weakening throughout your body, mimicking the symptoms of a wasting illness rather than obvious poisoning. Within a few weeks, most healers would have diagnosed you with some unexplained ailment, never suspecting deliberate harm at all." Elara felt her stomach twist as the healer's words confirmed exactly what she had feared since the moment the ancient wolf refused to let her touch the box. "Someone wanted it to look natural," she said quietly, "like my body was simply failing, the way everyone already assumed my wolf spirit had failed. Whoever did this understood pack medicine well enough to make the symptoms convincing," Priya agreed. "This was not the work of an amateur, Elara. Nightbane root is not easily acquired, and working it into metal without leaving obvious residue requires real skill. Someone with resources and knowledge crafted this specifically to harm you slowly, without drawing suspicion." Elara left the healer's chambers with the confirmed proof clutched carefully in a sealed pouch Priya had provided, her mind racing through everything her father had told her 2 nights earlier. This was not simply old suspicion anymore, decades-old grief dressed up as caution. This was fresh, deliberate, current evidence that someone within the pack wanted her weakened or dead, and it had arrived less than a full day after the council meeting where Vera Ashworth had watched her walk through the chamber doors with an expression Elara now understood far too well. She found Damien waiting at the training grounds as usual, and the moment he saw her expression, his easy greeting faded into immediate concern. "What happened?" he asked. Elara handed him the sealed pouch wordlessly, watching his face darken as she explained everything Priya had discovered. The careful craftsmanship of the poisoned bracelet, the patience required to plan such an attack, the ancient wolf's warning that had saved her from wearing it without ever realizing the danger. "This isn't the same as a rogue scouting party testing our borders," Damien said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This came from inside our own territory. Someone here wants you dead, and they're willing to be patient about it." Elara hesitated, weighing whether to finally share the full truth her father had revealed, the connection to Vera Ashworth, the suspicions surrounding her mother's death, the suppression of her own wolf spirit that had shaped her entire childhood. She had held the information close for 2 days, uncertain who she could truly trust within a pack that had spent years treating her as invisible at best and disposable at worst. But watching Damien's genuine anger on her behalf, remembering the careful patience he had shown during their training sessions, she made a decision. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about who I think is responsible." They found a private corner near the edge of the training grounds, away from curious ears, and Elara recounted everything her father had shared 2 nights earlier, watching Damien's expression shift from anger to something more complicated as the full scope of the story unfolded. His mother's death disguised as an accident, the suppression placed on Elara as a small child, and the name that connected both crimes to a woman who currently sat on his father's own council, trusted and respected for over 2 decades. "Vera Ashworth," Damien repeated slowly, once Elara finished, his voice carrying disbelief, tangled with the sinking recognition of someone realizing uncomfortable pieces were falling into place far too easily. "She's been on the council since before I was born. My father trusts her judgment more than almost anyone else's." "I know how it sounds," Elara said. "My father has no solid proof beyond suspicion, not until now. But this She gestured to the sealed pouch containing the poisoned bracelet. This is real. Someone tried to poison me 2 nights after that council meeting. 2 nights after Vera Ashworth watched me walk through those chamber doors looking like she'd seen a ghost. Damien was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the seriousness of the accusation against the reality of what it would mean to challenge a respected council member without absolute proof. If you're right, he said finally, and I bring this to my father without more evidence than a poisoned bracelet with no clear origin, Vera will simply claim ignorance, and will have accomplished nothing, except warning her that we're already looking in her direction. She'll cover her tracks even more carefully than she already has. Then what do we do? Alara asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Wait for her to try again, hoping we catch her in the act next time? No, Damien said, his expression sharpening with new resolve. We investigate quietly first. My father keeps records of every council member's activities, movements, and correspondence, standard practice for anyone in a position of significant trust within the pack. If Vera has been careful enough to avoid direct suspicion for 18 years, she may have grown confident enough recently to make small mistakes. We need to look for those mistakes before confronting her directly. Over the following days, their training sessions took on a dual purpose, continuing the careful work of helping Alara access her suppressed strength, while also serving as cover for a quieter investigation running alongside it. Damien gained access to council records under the pretense of studying pack governance in preparation for his eventual role as Alpha, and Alara, whenever her duties allowed, spoke carefully with older pack members who had known her mother, gathering fragments of memory that slowly began forming a clearer picture of what had truly happened 18 years earlier. Bethan, the elder who had spoken up in Alara's defense during the bonding ceremony, proved unexpectedly helpful once Alara worked up the courage to approach her privately. The old woman listened to Alara's careful, guarded questions about Miriam Voss with a knowing expression that suggested she had long suspected more than she had ever said aloud. Your mother and I trained together as young wolves, Bethan admitted, settling into a chair in her modest quarters as Alara sat across from her. She was remarkable, Alara. Truly remarkable. The kind of strength and instinct that comes along perhaps once in a generation. Vera Ashworth trained alongside us as well, and I remember, even then, how deeply she resented anyone who outshone her, how carefully she worked to ensure her own reputation never suffered by comparison. Did you ever suspect she had something to do with my mother's death? Alara asked quietly. Bethan's expression grew heavy with old regret. I suspected many things over the years that I lacked the courage or the proof to act upon. Your mother's death was reported as a border patrol accident, and I accepted that explanation for far longer than I should have, because questioning it meant questioning someone who had, by that point, already secured significant influence within the pack. I am ashamed to admit that fear kept me silent for far longer than it should have. You're not silent now, Alara said. No, Bethan agreed, meeting her eyes steadily. I am not. Whatever help I can offer you now, Alara, you have it. Your mother deserved better than the silence she received. So do you. With Bethan's help, Alara began piecing together a clearer timeline of the months surrounding her mother's death, cross-referencing what the old elder remembered against the records Damien slowly gathered from the council archives. A pattern began emerging, subtle but unmistakable once properly examined. Unusual expenditures from Vera's personal accounts in the weeks before Miriam's death, later explained in council records as payments toward legitimate pack business that Bethan now recalled never actually occurred. A brief, unexplained absence from Vera's official duties during the exact period Miriam had died, dismissed at the time as illness. None of it constituted definitive proof on its own. Together, woven carefully alongside the poisoned bracelet and the suppression Alara had lived with her entire childhood, it painted a picture too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. We're close, Damien said one evening, nearly a week after the poisoned gift had first arrived, as they reviewed the gathered evidence spread across a table in a quiet corner of the pack archives. Close enough that I think we need to bring this to my father soon, before Vera realizes how much ground we've covered. Alara studied the collected pages, the timeline they had painstakingly assembled, and felt the familiar mixture of anger and grief settling over her once again, sharper now than it had been 2 days earlier, tempered by the growing certainty that justice, however delayed, might finally be within reach. You have done remarkable work, the ancient wolf said quietly, as she prepared to leave the archives that evening, exhaustion from the long investigation settling heavily over her despite the small satisfaction of progress made. Your mother's courage lives on in you more clearly than you realize, Alara. She confronted injustice directly, and paid a terrible price for that courage. You are choosing a wiser path, gathering proof rather than acting on anger alone, but the courage required is no less significant. I just want this to be over, Alara admitted quietly, gathering the pages into a careful hidden bundle to protect from prying eyes. I want my mother's name cleared. I want the truth about what happened to me finally acknowledged, and I want to stop looking over my shoulder, wondering what Vera Ashworth might try next. That day is coming, the ancient wolf assured her. But be warned, Alara. Cornered predators are often the most dangerous. When Vera realizes how close you have come to exposing her, she will not simply surrender quietly. Whatever comes next, prepare yourself for it to be far more dangerous than a poisoned gift left quietly at your gate. Alara carried those words with her as she made her way back toward the Luna quarters that night, the weight of the gathered evidence heavy in her hands, and heavier still in the growing certainty that the quiet, patient investigation of the past week was rapidly approaching its end. Somewhere within the pack's own walls, a woman who had spent 2 decades building a reputation on careful control was about to discover exactly how much of that control had already begun slipping through her fingers. Vera Ashworth noticed the missing records 2 days before Alara and Damien finished assembling their timeline, though she did not immediately understand the full significance of what she had discovered. A clerk in the council archives, loyal to her through years of small favors and careful cultivation, mentioned in passing that Damien Cross had spent several afternoons reviewing old financial records, ostensibly as part of his preparation to eventually take his father's seat. It was a reasonable enough explanation on its surface, the kind of diligent study any responsible heir might undertake. Vera might have dismissed it entirely, had the clerk not also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the records Damien requested most frequently belonged to the exact period surrounding Miriam Voss's death. She sat with that information for a long evening, turning it over carefully, weighing the possibility of coincidence against the far more troubling likelihood that Callan Voss had finally broken his 18 years of silence, and that his daughter, now bonded to a power capable of tearing through carefully constructed suppression, had begun looking exactly where Vera had spent 2 decades, ensuring no one would think to look. The poison bracelet had been a calculated risk, one she had taken with full awareness that failure remained possible. She had not expected the ancient wolf's bond to grant Alara enough awareness to avoid the trap entirely, and she had certainly not expected the failed attempt to accelerate an investigation, rather than simply serving as one quiet setback among many contingencies she had prepared over the years. She summoned the young man who answered to her directly, the same one who had brought her news of the bonding ceremony nearly 2 weeks earlier, and spoke to him now with none of the calm composure she typically maintained. I need to know exactly what Damien Cross has reviewed in the archives, she said, and I need to know whether Alara Voss has spoken privately with Bethan, or any other elder who might remember more than they should about events 18 years past. You think they're building a case against you, the young man said carefully. I think, Vera replied, her voice tight with the first real strain of fear she had allowed herself to feel, in longer than she cared to admit, that patience has served me well for 2 decades, and that patience alone will not be enough to protect me, if they have gathered even a fraction of what I suspect they have. We need a new plan, one that does not rely on subtlety. Over the following days, Vera moved with the careful urgency of someone rebuilding a foundation she had believed permanently secure. She reached out quietly to contacts within rival packs she had cultivated over years of political maneuvering, contacts who owed her favors significant enough to guarantee their discretion, and began laying the groundwork for a contingency she had hoped never to need. An alliance with outside forces powerful enough to eliminate a problem that could no longer be handled quietly from within the pack's own walls. She also began, with far greater subtlety than the poisoned bracelet had required, working to undermine whatever evidence Alara and Damien might have gathered, not through direct confrontation, which would only confirm their suspicions, but through carefully placed doubt. She mentioned, in casual conversation with several council members, her concern that the young Luna vessel's sudden strength might be affecting her judgment, perhaps even her stability. She suggested, gently and without any obvious malice, that grief over a mother she barely remembered might be leading Alara toward conclusions that comfort rather than truth, blaming a convenient scapegoat for tragedies that had simple, unfortunate explanations. The seeds of doubt she planted grew slowly, but Vera had built her entire career on understanding exactly how patient such seeds needed to be to take root convincingly. By the time Alara and Damien felt ready to bring their gathered evidence before Alpha Garrick, Vera intended to ensure that evidence arrived into an environment already primed to question its validity, rather than accept it at face value. She was careful, throughout this quiet campaign, to maintain her usual composed presence during council meetings, offering measured, reasonable counsel exactly as she always had, giving no outward sign of the storm building beneath her calm exterior. Only in the privacy of her own chambers, late at night, staring at the hidden drawer that still contained the physical proof of everything she had done, did the fear she refused to show elsewhere finally surface fully. She had killed once before to protect what she had built, a decision made in desperation nearly 2 decades earlier that she had spent years telling herself was justified, necessary, the unfortunate cost of protecting her rightful place within the pack's hierarchy. She had told herself, in the years since, that she would never need to make such a choice again, that the suppression placed on Alara had been enough to ensure the threat remained permanently contained. Now, watching that containment crumble faster than she had believed possible, Vera found herself facing the same choice once again, and found, to her own quiet unease, that the years had not made the decision any easier to face, only more urgent. She closed the hidden drawer and returned to her desk, drafting a careful, coded message to be sent to her contact within the Thornfield pack, the same territory whose rogue scouts had tested Crimson Moon's defenses nearly 2 weeks earlier. If subtlety could no longer protect her position, she would need allies willing to act with considerably less restraint, and she intended to ensure that whatever came next left no trail leading back to her door, regardless of what it ultimately cost the pack she had spent 2 decades serving with such carefully maintained loyalty. Alpha Garrick listened without interruption, as Alara and Damien laid out everything they had gathered across nearly 2 weeks of careful investigation, the poisoned bracelet resting on the table between them, alongside Bethan's written testimony, and the timeline of financial records Damien had painstakingly assembled from the council archives. The chamber remained silent, except for Garrick's occasional, measured questions, his expression giving away nothing of what he truly thought as the story unfolded. Vera Ashworth sat at her usual place among the council, her composure unbroken despite the weight of the accusations being laid out in careful, methodical detail, directly across from her. Alara watched her closely throughout the presentation, searching for any crack in that calm exterior, any flicker of guilt or fear that might confirm everything her father had told her. Vera offered nothing, her expression carrying only mild, appropriate concern, the reaction any innocent council member might display upon hearing serious allegations leveled against them. "This is a grave accusation," Garrick said once Damien finished speaking, his gaze moving between the assembled evidence and Vera's composed face. "Vera, you have served this pack faithfully for over 2 decades. I would like to hear your response before drawing any conclusions." Vera inclined her head respectfully, her voice steady and measured when she finally spoke. "Alpha, I understand the pain that drives a young woman to seek answers about her mother's death, and I do not fault Alara for wanting clarity after so many years of uncertainty. But I must express deep concern about the nature of this evidence. Financial records showing unusual expenditures nearly 2 decades old, memories from an elder who admits she carried suspicions but never brought them forward at the time, and a poisoned gift with no confirmed origin beyond speculation. I understand grief can lead people toward conclusions that feel satisfying, even when they lack solid foundation. The Nightbane root was confirmed by our own healer," Damien said sharply. "That is not speculation." "No," Vera agreed calmly. "The poison itself is confirmed. Its source is not. Anyone within this pack, or beyond it, could have sent that gift, including rivals who might benefit from sowing exactly this kind of division and suspicion among our own ranks, during a moment of significant political vulnerability." She paused, letting the implication settle before continuing. "I would ask the council to consider who truly benefits from a narrative that pits our most trusted advisors against our newly bonded Luna vessel, at precisely the moment our pack's strength is being tested by outside forces." Ilara felt a flash of frustration at how smoothly Vera redirected the conversation, planting doubt with the same careful skill her father had described 18 years earlier. She glanced at the assembled council members, several of whom now wore expressions of genuine uncertainty, rather than the outrage she had hoped the evidence would inspire. "I understand this is difficult to accept," Ilara said, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the anger building in her chest. "But my father witnessed strange occurrences in our home, in the months following my mother's death. Occurrences that stopped only once my wolf spirit manifested, at a strength far below normal. The timing is not coincidence. Grief can create patterns where none exist," Vera said gently, though something beneath the gentleness carried a warning Ilara recognized instantly. "I lost colleagues and friends during that same period of pack history, Ilara. Losses that shaped how our entire community operated for years afterward. I understand the desire to find someone responsible for pain that otherwise feels senseless. I simply ask that this council not act rashly against a decades-long record of service, based on evidence this circumstantial." Garrick was quiet for a long moment, his expression carrying the weight of a decision he clearly did not want to make hastily. "I will not dismiss these concerns entirely," he said finally, "but neither will I act against a respected council member without more definitive proof than what has been presented today. I am ordering a formal, discreet investigation into the matter, to be conducted by neutral parties outside this council's usual influence. Until that investigation concludes, Vera will retain her position, though her activities will be monitored more closely than has previously been customary." It was not the outcome Ilara had hoped for, but it was, she reminded herself as they left the council chamber, more than complete dismissal. The seed of doubt had been planted within the pack's leadership, even if Vera's careful counter-argument had prevented immediate action. Somewhere within that chamber, Ilara suspected, at least a few council members now carried genuine uncertainty about the woman they had trusted for decades. "She's good," Damien said grimly, as they walked away from the chamber, frustration evident in his tightened jaw. "I underestimated how skillfully she could turn this back on us." "She's had 18 years of practice," Ilara said. "We knew this wouldn't be simple." "The formal investigation is not nothing," the ancient wolf offered as they made their way toward the training grounds for their now daily session. "Neutral investigators will not be as easily influenced by Vera's cultivated reputation as the council members who have trusted her for years. This may yet uncover the proof direct confrontation could not provide." "I hope you're right," Ilara murmured, though the exhaustion of the morning's confrontation had settled heavily over her, dampening the small satisfaction of progress made. Their training session that afternoon carried a different intensity than the sessions before it, both of them channeling frustration into focused effort. Ilara noticed her strength continuing its gradual return, movements that had felt impossible 2 weeks earlier now coming with increasing, if still imperfect, ease. Damien pushed her harder than he had before, clearly sensing that whatever came next in the conflict with Vera, Ilara would need every advantage she could access. "The barrier is nearly gone," he observed, watching her successfully complete a complex defensive sequence that would have been impossible just days earlier. "Whatever suppression was placed on you, the bond seems to be dissolving the last of it." "He is correct," the ancient wolf confirmed. "I can feel it clearly now, the final threads holding the old binding together. Given a little more time, Ilara, you will have full access to the strength that was always meant to be yours." The thought carried both relief and apprehension. Ilara had spent 17 years defined by weakness, and the prospect of finally shedding that identity entirely felt almost as disorienting as the initial bonding ceremony had been. She wondered, not for the first time, what kind of person she would become once the last of the suppression finally dissolved, whether the strength waiting beneath it would feel like reclaiming something stolen or becoming someone entirely unfamiliar to herself. As evening settled over the training grounds, a runner arrived with an urgent message for Damien, interrupting their session before it fully concluded. He read the note quickly, his expression darkening with each line. "The neutral investigators assigned to Vera's case have already found something," he said, looking up at Ilara with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "A hidden compartment discovered during a routine search of the council archive storage, containing correspondence between Vera and a contact within the Thornfield pack. My father wants us in the council chamber immediately." Ilara's heart raced as they hurried back toward the central grounds, hope and fear tangling together in equal measure. After nearly 2 weeks of careful, patient investigation, after Vera's smooth deflection during the morning's confrontation, it seemed the proof they needed might finally have surfaced, not through their own efforts, but through the very formal investigation Alpha Garrick had ordered, as a compromise between action and caution. When they reached the council chamber, they found Alpha Garrick standing over a small collection of documents spread across the long table, his expression unlike anything Alara had seen from him before, cold and controlled, in a way that suggested a fury he was working hard to contain. 2 neutral investigators, wolves from a distant territory with no ties to Crimson Moon politics, stood nearby, having clearly just delivered their findings. "Read this," Garrick said without preamble, sliding a folded letter across the table toward Alara and Damien. Alara picked it up carefully, her hands unsteady as she unfolded the aged parchment. The handwriting was neat and precise, unmistakably formal, and the words within left little room for the kind of doubt Vera had so skillfully cultivated that morning. It was a coded message, but the investigators had already provided a careful translation beneath the original text, revealing a request for assistance in dealing with what the letter referred to only as a persistent obstacle, along with an offer of significant future favor in exchange for discreet cooperation. The letter bore no direct signature, but the seal pressed into the wax was unmistakable, a mark Alara had seen before on official council correspondence bearing Vera Ashworth's authority. "There is more," one of the investigators said quietly, producing a second document. Financial records confirming payment made to a contact within a neighboring territory, dated within days of Miriam Voss's reported accident. The amount corresponds closely with typical compensation for eliminating a political rival discreetly, based on historical records we've cross-referenced from similar incidents in other packs. Damien's jaw tightened as he read over Alara's shoulder, his earlier frustration hardening into something colder and more resolved. "This is enough," he said, looking to his father. "This is more than circumstantial evidence and old memories. This is direct correspondence with her own seal." Garrick nodded slowly, though his expression remained grim rather than triumphant. "It is enough to formally charge her," he agreed. "I have ordered her detained immediately, pending a full council hearing." He paused, his gaze settling on Alara with something that looked almost like regret. "I am sorry it took this long to uncover what should have been addressed years ago. Whatever justice this council can offer you now, Alara, you have my word it will be pursued fully." Alara felt the weight of 18 years finally beginning to lift, relief and grief tangling together as she stared at the proof that had eluded her family for so long, proof that confirmed everything her father had suspected and feared to speak aloud. Her mother's death had not been an accident. It had been murder, calculated and deliberate, committed by a woman who had spent 2 decades since building a life on the foundation of that violence. "Where is she now?" Damien asked, glancing toward the chamber doors as if expecting Vera to appear at any moment. "Guards were sent to her quarters the moment these documents were confirmed," Garrick said, though a flicker of unease crossed his face as he spoke. As if summoned by the question itself, one of the guards burst through the chamber doors moments later, breathless, and clearly bearing unwelcome news. "Alpha," the guard said, "Vera Ashworth's quarters are empty. Her personal belongings appear to have been packed recently, and none of the household staff report seeing her leave, though several noted she seemed unusually occupied with correspondence over the past several days." Garrick's expression darkened further. "She anticipated this outcome," he said grimly, "which means she likely has contingencies already in motion." He turned to the investigators. "Search her chambers thoroughly. I want to know everything she left behind, and everything that might indicate where she has gone or what she intends to do next." Alara felt the relief of moments earlier, curdling into fresh apprehension. A woman patient enough to plan a murder 18 years in advance of ever needing to cover its consequences would not simply flee, without ensuring some measure of retribution or protection for herself first. The letter they had discovered mentioned a contact within a neighboring territory, offered assistance in exchange for future cooperation, a relationship that had clearly extended well beyond a single desperate request made decades earlier. "The Thornfield pack," Alara said slowly, the pieces settling into place with growing dread. "The scouts who tested our defenses 2 weeks ago. What if that wasn't simply rogue warriors acting without authorization? What if Vera arranged that as well, testing not just my strength, but how quickly Crimson Moon would respond to a genuine threat?" Garrick's expression turned grave as he considered the possibility, And before anyone could respond further, the deep, urgent sound of the pack's warning horn split the evening air, echoing across the training grounds and through the chamber's open windows. It was a sound Elara had heard only once before in her life, during a border dispute years earlier, that the pack still spoke of with grim seriousness, the signal reserved for a genuine, large-scale threat, rather than a simple scouting test. "Elara," the ancient wolf said, its voice suddenly sharp with alarm. "Something is wrong. I sense movement beyond the northern boundary, considerably larger than the party we faced before. This does not feel like a test." Garrick was already moving toward the chamber doors, shouting orders to the investigators and guards still gathered around the table. Vera Ashworth's carefully cultivated allies, it seemed, had finally decided that subtlety was no longer worth the risk. The training grounds had transformed into a scene of controlled chaos by the time Elara and Damien reached them, warriors pouring from every corner of the territory, forming defensive lines along the northern boundary, while archers took position atop the outer wall. Torches blazed across the darkening grounds, and beyond the wall, in the shadowed tree line, Elara could see movement, dozens of shapes gathering with the kind of coordinated discipline that confirmed this was no rogue scouting party. "That's not Thornfield's typical formation," Damien said grimly, studying the distant shapes with a warrior's practiced eye. "That's a full assault force, organized and prepared. Vera didn't just ask for a favor, she built an army." Alpha Garrick arrived moments later, already shifting into his own powerful wolf form as he took position at the center of the defensive line, his presence alone steadying the warriors around him. He addressed the gathered fighters with a voice that carried clearly across the grounds, despite the growing chaos. "Hold the line," he commanded. "Whatever comes over that wall, we do not break formation. Crimson Moon has defended this territory for generations, and we will defend it tonight." Elara stood near the center of the grounds, her heart pounding as she watched the shapes beyond the wall begin to move, a slow, deliberate advance, rather than a chaotic charge, the mark of an experienced force, confident in its numbers and its preparation. "This is a moment that will test everything, Elara," the ancient wolf said inside her mind, its voice carrying a gravity she had not heard from it before. "I must tell you something now that I had hoped to share under gentler circumstances, but the truth may serve you better in the fight ahead than my continued silence." "Now?" Elara asked, incredulous, as the first ranks of attacking wolves broke from the tree line, closing the distance toward the outer wall with terrifying speed. "Yes. Now. Listen carefully. I did not simply sleep for a century by choice, waiting patiently for the right vessel to appear. I slept because the last time I bonded with a wolf, I was nearly destroyed entirely, and it took a century of dormancy simply to recover enough strength to wake again. My previous vessel died protecting this very pack from an enemy far more dangerous than the one gathering beyond your walls tonight, and I have carried the weight of that loss through every year of my long sleep." Elara felt a chill, despite the growing heat of battle building around her, understanding, for the first time, the full weight of what the ancient wolf had entrusted to her when it chose her at the bonding ceremony weeks earlier. "I tell you this not to frighten you, but because you deserve to understand exactly what this bond means, and exactly why I chose so carefully this time. My previous vessel was strong, celebrated, exactly the kind of warrior everyone expected me to choose again. But strength alone was not enough to save her, in the end. What she lacked, and what I searched an entire century to find in you, was the particular kind of resilience that comes not from never being broken, but from surviving being broken again and again, and choosing, every single time, not to stay that way." The first wave of attacking wolves crashed against the defensive line with brutal force, and Elara watched, frozen for a moment, by the weight of what the ancient wolf had just revealed, as warriors on both sides collided in the flickering torchlight. Damien shifted beside her, moving to join the front line, but paused, glancing back at her with visible concern. "Elara, we need you," he said. "Whatever's happening, we need your strength out here." "He is right," the ancient wolf said, its tone shifting from solemn reflection to sharp, focused urgency. "The barrier inside you has nearly dissolved entirely. What remains will not survive what is about to happen. Trust the bond fully now, Elara, more fully than you ever have before. I need you to let go of every doubt you have carried about your own worth, because in the next few minutes, doubt will cost lives." Alara took a steadying breath, closing her eyes for the briefest moment as she reached inward, searching for the last remnants of the barrier that had shaped her entire understanding of herself for 17 years. She found it, a thin, brittle thread of resistance still clinging stubbornly at the edges of her spirit, the final echo of Vera Ashworth's careful, cruel work so many years earlier. She let it go. The sensation that followed was unlike anything she had experienced during the previous confrontation weeks earlier. Warmth spreading through her body, not as a sudden surge but as a complete, permanent transformation. Every cell in her body waking to a strength that had been waiting patiently beneath the surface her entire life. Silver light bloomed across her skin, brighter and steadier than it had ever been before, and when she opened her eyes, the world around her seemed sharper, clearer, every movement on the battlefield visible, with a clarity that bordered on the supernatural. She moved without conscious thought, closing the distance to the front line in seconds, arriving just as one of the attacking wolves broke through the defensive formation, charging toward a group of younger warriors who had not yet fully committed to their positions. Alara intercepted the charging wolf with a speed and precision that felt, for the first time, entirely her own, rather than borrowed from a legendary spirit residing within her. The battle that unfolded across the training grounds over the following hour tested every warrior present, Crimson Moon's forces fighting with the desperate determination of defenders protecting their home, the attacking force pressing forward with the coordinated discipline of warriors who had been promised significant reward for their success. Alara fought alongside Damien and the pack's most experienced fighters, her transformed strength allowing her to hold positions that would have been impossible for her only hours earlier, turning back attackers who targeted her specifically, clearly having been informed exactly who the newly bonded Luna vessel was, and exactly how valuable eliminating her would prove to whoever had organized this assault. "She is here," the ancient wolf said suddenly, midway through the chaos of battle, its voice carrying a note of grim certainty. "Vera Ashworth. I can sense her presence at the edge of the tree line, watching rather than fighting." Alara scanned the shadowed boundary beyond the immediate fighting, and spotted her, standing at a careful distance from the battle itself, wrapped in a dark cloak, her expression unreadable even from this distance. She was not participating in the assault directly, Alara realized, but directing it, watching the battle unfold with the calculating patience of someone who had built her entire life around careful, controlled violence conducted at a safe remove from her own hands. "Damien," Alara called out, catching his attention amid the chaos of the fighting around them. "She's there, at the tree line, watching." Damien's eyes followed her gesture, his expression hardening as he spotted the same distant figure. "We end this faster if we can reach her," he said. "Without her directing this attack, Thornfield's warriors may lose their coordination." They fought their way toward the tree line together, cutting through the chaos of battle with a combined strength that surprised even the attackers who had clearly expected an easier confrontation than the one they were currently facing. Alara felt the full weight of her restored strength coursing through her with every movement, no longer the borrowed power of crisis-driven instinct, but something steady and permanent, woven completely into who she was, rather than accessed only in desperate moments. As they neared the edge of the fighting, close enough now to see Vera's expression clearly in the torchlight, Alara caught the exact moment the older woman recognized how quickly her carefully organized assault was beginning to fail. Vera's composed mask finally cracked, revealing something raw and desperate beneath years of careful control, and she turned, beginning to retreat deeper into the tree line, rather than remain to witness the collapse of her final, desperate gambit. "She's running," Damien said, already moving to pursue. "Let her run for now," the ancient wolf advised, its voice cutting through the chaos with sudden clarity. "The battle here is not yet finished, and your warriors need you both more urgently than a single pursuit into unfamiliar territory. Vera Ashworth has spent 2 decades building contingencies, Alara. She will not vanish entirely, not when everything she has built depends on either destroying you completely or securing enough power to survive your continued existence. This will not be the last time your paths cross." Reluctantly, Alara and Damien turned back toward the ongoing battle, rather than pursuing Vera into the darkness, focusing their combined strength on the attacking force, still pressing against Crimson Moon's defensive lines. Without their leader's careful direction, the Thornfield warriors' coordination began fracturing, exactly as Damien had predicted, their disciplined formation dissolving into disorganized retreat as Crimson Moon's defenders, bolstered by Alara's newly unlocked strength, pushed back with renewed ferocity. By the time the last of the attacking force retreated beyond the northern boundary, the sky had begun lightening toward dawn, the training grounds bearing the scars of a battle that would be remembered within Crimson Moonpack for years to come. Alara stood amid the aftermath, exhausted but steady, the silver light beneath her skin finally beginning to fade as the adrenaline of battle slowly receded, leaving behind a strength that, for the first time in her life, felt permanently, unquestionably her own. Alpha Garrick moved through the grounds, checking on wounded warriors and coordinating the pack's recovery efforts, his expression carrying the weight of a leader who understood exactly how close his territory had come to catastrophic loss that night. When he finally approached Alara, his gaze carried something that had not been present in his earlier interactions with her, a genuine, unreserved respect that no longer required proof or demonstration. "You held the line tonight," he said simply. "Alongside my son, and alongside warriors who have trained their entire lives for exactly this kind of battle. Whatever doubts this pack once carried about the ancient wolf's choice, I believe those doubts died somewhere on this battlefield tonight." Alara looked out over the training grounds, at the exhausted warriors tending to wounds and beginning the slow work of recovery, and felt the full weight of everything the night had revealed, both about the strength finally fully hers, and about the deeper history the ancient wolf had shared amid the chaos of battle, a history of loss and sacrifice that made the bond between them feel less like a gift and more like a shared burden they now carried together. "Vera is still out there," Alara said quietly. "This isn't finished." "No," Garrick agreed grimly, following her gaze toward the distant tree line where the older woman had disappeared. "It is not. But tonight, Crimson Moon proved it will not fall easily to whatever she attempts next. And neither, I suspect, will you." Later that morning, once the wounded had been tended and the exhausted warriors finally allowed themselves rest, Alara found a quiet corner near the edge of the training grounds and sat alone, watching the sun rise fully over the territory that had nearly been lost hours earlier. Her body ached in ways that reminded her of every strike she had taken and delivered throughout the long night, but beneath the exhaustion, she felt a stillness she had not experienced since the bonding ceremony first upended her entire life. "You asked me once why I chose you," the ancient wolf said quietly, its voice gentler now than it had been amid the urgency of battle. "I told you it was because your spirit had never broken, despite every reason it had to. I think, after tonight, you deserve to understand the fuller truth behind that choice." "Tell me," Alara said, watching the pale morning light stretch across the scarred training grounds. "My previous vessel was named Ren," the ancient wolf began, and Alara felt something shift in the quality of its presence, a softening around old grief that had clearly never fully healed despite the passage of a full century. "She was chosen much as you were, though the circumstances of her selection differed considerably. She came from a family already celebrated within her pack, already strong, already expected to achieve great things. When I chose her, no one questioned the decision the way this pack questioned mine with you. Everyone simply nodded, satisfied that strength had recognized strength. But strength was never truly what I searched for in her, any more than it was what I searched for in you. I saw in Ren a fierce protective love for her pack, a willingness to place herself between danger and those she cared for without hesitation. It was a beautiful quality, Alara, and also, in the end, a fatal one. When an enemy force far larger than the one you faced tonight moved against her territory, she did not wait for allies, did not wait for careful strategy or patient preparation. She threw herself into the heart of the fighting, trusting our bond to carry her through, and for a time, it did. She fought with a strength that saved dozens of lives that day. The ancient wolf's presence grew heavier, carrying the unmistakable weight of grief, even after a century of distance from the memory. In the end, the enemy force was simply too large, and Ren's courage, unmatched by caution, led her to overextend herself protecting others, until there was nothing left of her strength to protect herself. I felt her die, Alara, felt the bond between us sever in an instant, and the loss nearly destroyed me as well. I retreated into dormancy not entirely by choice, but because the wound of that loss was deep enough that recovery took the better part of a century. Alara sat with the weight of the story, understanding now why the ancient wolf had spoken so urgently amid the chaos of battle, why it had chosen to reveal this history precisely when it did. You were afraid I would make the same choice, she said quietly. Throw myself into danger without thinking, the way she did. I was afraid, the ancient wolf admitted, and I remain watchful of that possibility, because I see echoes of her courage in you, Elara, the same willingness to place yourself between danger and those you care for. But I also see something Ren never had the chance to develop, a caution born from years of having to think carefully before acting, of never having the luxury of impulsive strength, because your body could not always deliver what your heart demanded. That caution, tempered now with the strength you have finally reclaimed, is what I believe will serve you where it could not save her. I'm not her replacement, Elara said, more a statement than a question, though she found herself needing to hear the ancient wolf confirm it regardless. No, the ancient wolf said firmly, warmth returning to its voice. You are not Ren, and I would never ask you to be. I searched a century for someone entirely different, someone whose strength grew from survival rather than privilege, whose courage learned patience the hard way, rather than never needing to learn it at all. Ren taught me the cost of reckless courage. You, I believe, will teach me something about courage tempered by wisdom, if you allow yourself the chance to grow into everything you are now capable of becoming. Elara sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the weight of the story, the strange gift of understanding exactly why the ancient wolf had waited a full century, rather than simply choosing the next strong candidate to present itself. She thought of her own mother, another woman who had shown fierce courage in confronting injustice directly, and who had paid the same price Ren once had. She thought of the careful, patient work she and Damien had done together over recent weeks, gathering evidence rather than acting on anger alone, and understood, perhaps for the first time, why that patience had mattered as much as the strength she had finally reclaimed. Damien found her there a short while later, having finished checking on the last of the wounded warriors, and settled beside her without immediately speaking, apparently sensing she needed the quiet before conversation. When he finally did speak, his voice carried a rough exhaustion, tempered by something steadier underneath. My father wants to organize a proper pursuit of Vera within the next few days, he said, once the pack has recovered enough to spare the warriors needed. She won't have gone far, not with the resources she'd need to disappear entirely, and Thornfield's Alpha has already sent word disavowing the attack, claiming the warriors who joined her acted without official sanction. Do you believe that? Elara asked. I believe Thornfield's Alpha doesn't want a full war with Crimson Moon over one council member's personal vendetta, Damien said carefully, which suggests Vera may find fewer allies willing to shelter her now than she expected when she built this alliance in the first place. Elara nodded slowly, watching the warriors below beginning the work of rebuilding damaged sections of the outer wall, the ordinary rhythm of pack life, already reasserting itself despite the exhaustion and loss the night had brought. Then we find her, she said, before she has time to build another contingency. Damien glanced at her, something like admiration passing behind his tired eyes. We will, he agreed. Together, this time, the way we should have been handling everything from the start. The pursuit began 3 days later, once the pack had recovered enough strength to spare a dedicated search party, without leaving Crimson Moon territory vulnerable to further attack. Alpha Garrick assembled a small, capable group led by Damien, with Elara insisting on joining despite her father's evident worry when he learned of her intention. You've barely had time to fully adjust to your restored strength, Callan said, standing in the doorway of the cottage, as Elara prepared her supplies for the journey ahead. Let the trained warriors handle this. She tried to kill me, father, Elara said, checking the fastenings on a pack containing supplies for the days ahead. And she killed mother. I'm not staying behind while other people finish what should have been my fight from the beginning. Her father's expression carried the familiar tension of fear mixed with reluctant pride, an expression Elara had grown to recognize well over the past weeks. Your mother said something very similar once, he admitted quietly. I could not talk her out of confronting Vera directly all those years ago, and I have spent every day since, wondering whether different words might have changed what happened. I don't want to make that same mistake with you. You're not making a mistake, Elara said gently, reaching out to squeeze his hand. This time, I'm not going in alone. I have Damien, the ancient wolf, and a pack that finally believes me, instead of dismissing everything I say. Her father pulled her into a brief embrace, his fear not fully dissolved but tempered by the truth of her words. "Come back to me," he said simply. "Whatever happens out there, come back." The search party departed at dawn, tracking the retreating remnants of Vera's alliance through the dense forest bordering Crimson Moon territory, following trails that grew increasingly difficult to follow as the days passed. Scouts reported sightings of small groups moving toward the distant mountains beyond Thornfield's own territory, an area known for its harsh terrain and scattered, lawless settlements that answered to no established pack authority, exactly the kind of place someone seeking to disappear might choose to hide. "She is being careful," the ancient wolf observed on the second day of tracking, as the party paused to rest near a narrow mountain stream, doubling back on her own trail, avoiding obvious paths. "This is not the behavior of someone panicking. She has clearly prepared contingencies for exactly this situation." "She's had 2 decades to prepare for the possibility of exposure," Damien said grimly, studying a set of tracks that split confusingly in 3 different directions near the stream's edge. "I doubt she left anything to chance." Alara knelt beside the tracks, closing her eyes briefly as she reached inward, toward the sharpened senses her fully restored strength had granted her. The bond with the ancient wolf allowed her an awareness of her surroundings that extended well beyond normal instinct, a subtle sense for danger and deception that had proven useful throughout the tracking effort. She could feel something now, faint but present, a residue of fear and haste beneath the deliberately confusing trail markings. "This way," she said, pointing toward the path leading deeper into the mountains, rather than the 2 more obvious routes branching toward Thornfield territory. "The other trails feel deliberate, like she wanted to be followed in the wrong direction. This one feels rushed, like she didn't have time to disguise it as carefully." Damien studied her for a moment, then nodded, trusting the instinct that had proven reliable throughout their journey. "Lead the way." They pressed deeper into the mountains as the day wore on, the terrain growing increasingly treacherous, narrow paths winding along steep cliffsides that demanded careful, deliberate movement. By late afternoon, they came upon a small, isolated settlement nestled within a hidden valley, the kind of place that existed specifically to avoid the notice of established pack territories, home to rogue wolves and exiles who had chosen to live beyond the structures most packs took for granted. "If she's hiding anywhere in this region," Damien said quietly, as they studied the settlement from a concealed position among the rocks above, "this is exactly the kind of place she'd choose. No pack authority, no records, no questions asked as long as coin changes hands." They descended carefully into the valley as evening settled over the mountains, moving with practiced caution through the settlement's narrow, unlit streets. The search proved frustrating at first, the settlement's residents unwilling to answer questions from strangers, until Damien's careful offer of significant reward loosened the tongue of an elderly innkeeper who confirmed, in a low, wary voice, that a woman matching Vera's description had arrived several days earlier, accompanied by 2 hired guards, and had taken rooms at the far edge of the settlement. They approached the indicated building under cover of darkness, and Alara felt her heart racing as they neared what might finally be the confrontation she had waited weeks to have. But as they positioned themselves to enter, a commotion erupted from within, shouts and the sound of struggle, followed by a scream that Alara recognized with sudden, sickening clarity. "That's my father," she said, her blood running cold. "That's his voice." It made no sense. Her mind raced to process the impossibility, even as her body moved instinctively toward the sound. Her father had remained safely behind at Crimson Moon territory. She had said goodbye to him herself only 3 days earlier. But the voice calling out in pain and fear beyond the building's walls was unmistakably his, and dread settled heavily in her chest as she realized exactly what must have happened while the search party had been tracking Vera through the mountains. Vera had not simply fled in panic. She had planned this confrontation carefully, using resources and contacts Alara had not fully accounted for. And somewhere in the days since the failed attack on Crimson Moon territory, she had found a way to reach Callan Voss directly, using him as leverage against the very daughter she had failed to eliminate through poison and open warfare. "Alara, wait," Damien said urgently, catching her arm before she could charge forward recklessly. "This is exactly what she wants. A trap, designed to draw you in without thinking clearly." "That's my father in there," Alara said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "He is right to caution you," the ancient wolf said, its voice steady despite the urgency of the moment. "But he is also right that we cannot simply retreat and leave your father in her hands. We need to move carefully, Alara, using everything you have learned rather than the reckless courage that cost Ren her life. Trust the strength you have built, not simply the fear driving you forward. Alara took a steadying breath, forcing herself to think clearly, despite the terror gripping her chest. Then we go in together, she said, looking to Damien and the two warriors who had accompanied them on the search. Carefully. But we go in now, before she has time to hurt him further. Damien nodded, already signaling the warriors into position around the building's perimeter, cutting off potential escape routes, while Alara and Damien approached the main entrance directly. The building's interior proved dimly lit, a single lantern casting flickering shadows across a modest common room, where Vera Ashworth stood waiting, her expression composed once again despite the desperate circumstances that had driven her to this remote settlement. Callan Voss knelt on the floor nearby, his hands bound, a thin trail of blood visible at his temple, where he had clearly been struck, but alive, his eyes widening with a mixture of relief and fear as he spotted his daughter in the doorway. Alara, Vera said calmly, as if greeting an expected guest, rather than the daughter of the man she held captive at her feet. I had hoped you would follow the trails I left behind, rather than tracking the truth so precisely. It seems I underestimated you once again. Let him go, Alara said, her voice carrying a steady authority that surprised even her, the fully restored strength of her bond with the ancient wolf, lending weight to every word. This is between you and me, Vera. It always has been. Vera's composed expression flickered, something desperate and exhausted showing briefly beneath the careful mask she had maintained for weeks. Is it though? She said, her voice carrying a bitter edge that had not been present during their earlier confrontations. Your mother made the same mistake, Alara, believing that confronting me directly would somehow resolve everything cleanly. It did not resolve cleanly then, and I fear it will not resolve cleanly now, regardless of how much strength that ancient spirit has granted you. She produced a small blade from within her cloak, pressing it lightly against Callan's throat, and Alara's entire body went rigid, every instinct screaming to close the distance immediately, tempered only by the ancient wolf's quiet, urgent reminder echoing in her mind. Patience, Alara. Watch for the opening. Do not give her the reckless charge she is hoping for. What do you want, Vera? Alara asked, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the blade resting against her father's throat. You've lost. Crimson Moon knows the truth. Thornfield has already disavowed you. Wherever you go from here, you have nothing left to build on. I want, Vera said slowly, her composure cracking further with every word. What I have always wanted. Recognition for everything I sacrificed to build a life of significance within a pack that would have overlooked me entirely otherwise. Your mother had that recognition handed to her freely, simply for being born with strength I had to claw for through years of careful, patient work. I refused to lose everything I built simply because a legendary spirit decided her daughter's suffering was more compelling than my own struggle. The words revealed something Alara had not fully understood until this moment, the depth of resentment and grievance that had driven Vera's decades of careful cruelty, twisted and self-justifying, but no less dangerous for the distorted logic underlying it. She realized, watching the blade tremble slightly against her father's throat, that Vera had reached the desperate end of every careful plan she had built, and desperate people, cornered and exhausted, often proved the most unpredictable of all. Killing him won't give you back what you've lost, Alara said carefully, keeping her voice measured, despite the fear coiling tight in her chest. It will only ensure there's nothing left for you to negotiate with. Right now, you still have a choice. You can still walk away from this with your life, even if everything else is gone. Walk away to where? Vera asked, a hollow, bitter laugh escaping her. Every pack within 100 miles will know my name by now, know exactly what I am. There is no life left for me to walk toward, Alara. You and that spirit inside you made certain of that. Damien shifted slightly beside Alara, his eyes tracking the two hired guards positioned near the room's far corners, clearly calculating the distance and timing required to intervene without endangering Callan further. Alara caught the subtle motion and understood immediately that he was searching for exactly the kind of opening the ancient wolf had urged her to wait for. You still have a choice about how this ends, Alara said again, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, close enough now to see the exhaustion etched deeply into Vera's face, the toll of weeks spent running, planning, and watching every careful plan unravel, despite years of preparation. My mother chose to confront you directly, and it cost her everything. I'm choosing something different. I'm asking you to end this without more bloodshed, because whatever you believe you're owed, hurting my father won't give it to you. For a moment, something in Vera's expression wavered, the desperate calculation behind her eyes, flickering with what might have been doubt, or exhaustion, or the first genuine crack in 2 decades of carefully maintained justification. The blade at Callan's throat trembled again, and Alara held her breath, watching, waiting for whatever came next. Then one of the hired guards near the room's corner shifted abruptly, reaching for a weapon at his belt, apparently deciding independently that the standoff had gone on long enough. Damien moved instantly, closing the distance in a blur of motion, and the careful, tense stillness of the room shattered into sudden, violent chaos. Alara lunged forward the moment Vera's attention split toward the commotion, closing the distance to her father with a speed her restored strength finally allowed her to access without hesitation. She caught Vera's wrist before the blade could do more than nick Callan's throat, wrenching it away with enough force to send the weapon clattering across the wooden floor. The second guard surged forward to intervene, and Alara found herself fighting on 2 fronts, defending her father, while Damien grappled with the first guard near the room's entrance, the narrow confines of the building making every movement dangerous and cramped. Vera, freed momentarily from Alara's grip, scrambled backward toward a rear door, clearly calculating an escape route, even amid the chaos she had helped unleash. "She's running again," Damien shouted, finishing his confrontation with the first guard, just as the second lunged toward Alara, forcing her to abandon her pursuit of Vera in favor of protecting her father, still bound and vulnerable on the floor beside her. Alara dispatched the second guard with a decisive strike, her strength no longer requiring the desperate improvisation of her earliest confrontations, but by the time she turned toward the rear door, Vera had already vanished into the darkness beyond, disappearing once again into the mountain terrain she clearly knew far better than her pursuers did. "Go," Callan said, his voice hoarse but steady, as Alara worked quickly to free his bound hands. "Alara, go after her. I'm safe now. Don't let her disappear again." Alara hesitated only a moment, torn between her father's safety and the desperate need to finally end the danger Vera represented, before Damien's steady hand on her shoulder settled the decision. "I'll stay with your father," he said. "Take one of the warriors and follow her trail while it's still fresh." "This ends tonight, Alara, one way or another." Alara nodded, gathering herself for what she understood, with sudden and complete clarity, would be the final confrontation, in a conflict that had shaped her entire life, long before she ever understood its true origins. She stepped out into the cold mountain night, following the faint, fading scent of Vera's desperate retreat into the darkness beyond the settlement's edge. The mountain trail wound higher into treacherous terrain, narrow rocky paths flanked by steep drops that demanded careful footing even for someone moving with Alara's newly restored strength and heightened senses. She followed the fading scent of Vera's passage alone, having left the accompanying warrior behind to help secure the settlement and protect her father and Damien from any remaining threats, trusting her own bond with the ancient wolf to guide her through terrain growing increasingly difficult as the night deepened. "She is close now," the ancient wolf said, its voice carrying quiet focus rather than the urgent alarm of earlier confrontations. "Exhausted and running out of options. This mountain range offers few paths beyond the one you are currently following. She will need to stop soon, whether by choice or by necessity." Alara pressed forward, her breath steady despite the demanding climb, her mind turning over everything Vera had revealed during the tense standoff in the settlement below. The desperate, twisted justification behind decades of careful cruelty, the resentment that had festered into murder and manipulation, the exhaustion of a woman who had finally run out of contingencies to protect the life she had built on someone else's blood. She found Vera nearly an hour later, standing at the edge of a narrow overlook where the mountain path abruptly ended, a sheer drop stretching into darkness beyond her, the only remaining route forward. Vera turned as Alara approached, her expression carrying none of the composed calculation Alara had grown accustomed to, replaced instead by raw, unguarded exhaustion. "There's nowhere left to run," Alara said, stopping several careful paces away, watching Vera's posture for any sign of further deception or hidden weapons. "No," Vera agreed quietly, her voice stripped of its usual careful control. "I suppose there isn't." They stood in silence for a long moment, the cold mountain wind carrying the distant sound of the settlement far below, the vast darkness of the night sky stretching overhead, indifferent to the culmination of a conflict that had shaped both their lives so completely. "Tell me why," Alara said finally, needing to hear it directly, needing some final understanding of the woman who had stolen her mother, her childhood, and nearly her own life, through years of patient, calculated cruelty. "Not the version you gave me in that settlement, the real reason." Vera was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the dark expanse beyond the overlook's edge. "I was never given anything freely," she said finally. "Not strength, not status, not the easy confidence that came so naturally to wolves like your mother. Everything I achieved within Crimson Moon Pack, I built through careful, relentless effort, watching others rise effortlessly, while I fought for every scrap of recognition I ever received. When your mother emerged as a Luna candidate, effortlessly gifted with a strength I had spent years struggling to match, something in me simply broke." "That doesn't justify murder," Alara said, her voice hard. "No," Vera agreed, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "It doesn't. I have known that for 18 years, Alara, and I have built an entire life around refusing to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that everything I sacrificed to protect was built on something unforgivable. It was easier to convince myself that survival justified whatever it required, that your mother's death was simply the unfortunate cost of a competition she should have known she was engaged in." Alara felt the weight of years of careful investigation, of gathered evidence and painful revelations, finally settling into something close to resolution, though the grief underlying it remained as sharp as it had been the moment her father first revealed the truth weeks earlier. "And the binding you placed on me?" she asked. "What justification did you build for that?" "Insurance," Vera said simply, without flinching from the admission. "I told myself, at the time, that suppressing your strength was mercy rather than cruelty, sparing you from ever becoming a target the way your mother had been. It was easier to believe that than to admit I was simply protecting myself from the possibility that Miriam's daughter might one day grow strong enough to challenge everything I had built on her mother's death." The confession, offered without the careful deflection Vera had used throughout their earlier confrontations, carried a strange weight. Not forgiveness, Alara understood immediately, but perhaps something closer to closure, the final piece of a truth that had eluded her family for 18 years, finally spoken aloud, plainly, without the careful manipulation that had shaped every previous conversation between them. "She has nowhere left to retreat," the ancient wolf observed quietly. "Physically, and I suspect, within herself as well. Be careful, Alara. Desperation can still be dangerous, even when it no longer wears the mask of calculated control." Alara took a careful step forward, watching Vera's expression shift with wary uncertainty. "This ends now," she said. "You'll return with me to Crimson Moon territory, and you'll face the Council's judgment for everything you've done. Not because I want mercy for you, but because my mother deserved justice through proper accounting, not through violence in the dark on some forgotten mountain trail." Vera studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her exhausted eyes. "Your mother would be proud of that answer," she said quietly. "It is more mercy than I offered her, at the end." For a moment, Alara believed the confrontation might resolve exactly as she had hoped, with surrender, rather than further violence, with the possibility of genuine justice, rather than another act of desperate cruelty added to the long list Vera had already accumulated. But as she took another careful step forward, extending a hand toward the woman who had shaped her entire life through hidden manipulation, Vera's expression shifted again, exhaustion giving way to something colder and more calculating. "I am sorry, Alara," she said, and there was genuine regret in her voice, tangled inseparably with the desperate calculation of someone who had spent 2 decades refusing to accept defeat gracefully. "But I cannot allow myself to face that judgment. Not after everything I have already lost." She lunged forward with sudden, unexpected speed, not toward Alara directly, but toward the narrow path leading back down the mountain, attempting a desperate final bid to escape past her, rather than accept the confrontation Alara had offered. Alara's restored reflexes responded instantly, catching Vera's arm before she could slip past, and the two of them grappled at the edge of the treacherous overlook, the sheer drop beyond, looming dangerously close, as their struggle carried them perilously near its edge. "Elara, be careful," the ancient wolf warned sharply, its voice cutting through the chaos of the struggle. "The ground here is unstable. Do not let desperation carry either of you over that edge." Elara fought to maintain her balance, using her restored strength to hold Vera back from the path, while avoiding the crumbling edge of the overlook, but Vera fought with the reckless desperation of someone who had already accepted she had nothing left to lose, twisting free of Elara's grip with a sudden, violent motion that sent them both stumbling dangerously close to the drop. For a terrifying moment, Elara felt her footing give way entirely, loose rock crumbling beneath her as she fought to regain balance at the very edge of the overlook, the dark expanse beyond, promising a fall that would end everything the past weeks had built toward. She caught herself at the last possible moment, fingers finding purchase on a solid outcrop of stone, but as she steadied herself, she saw Vera stumbling backward from the same violent struggle, her own footing failing entirely on the crumbling edge. Elara reacted without conscious thought, lunging forward to catch Vera's wrist before she could fall, the same instinct that had guided every choice she had made throughout the long investigation, the same commitment to justice rather than vengeance that had defined her approach from the very beginning. She held Vera suspended at the very edge of the overlook, the older woman's feet scrambling uselessly against loose rock, her weight straining against Elara's grip. "Why?" Vera gasped, staring up at her with an expression of genuine bewilderment. "Why save me, after everything I've done?" "Because I'm not you," Elara said, her arms straining with the effort of holding Vera's weight, her restored strength finally proving equal to the physical demands of the moment. "Because justice means something different than revenge, and I refuse to let you turn me into someone who doesn't understand that difference." With effort, she pulled Vera back from the edge, both of them collapsing onto the relatively stable ground beyond the crumbling overlook, breathing hard from the exertion and the lingering terror of how close the confrontation had come to ending in tragedy for both of them. Vera lay still for a long moment, staring up at the night sky, something in her expression finally, completely broken, the last remnants of careful control and desperate calculation, utterly exhausted. "I don't understand you," she said quietly, more to herself than to Elara. "I spent 18 years believing you would grow into someone bitter and broken, shaped by the same cruelty I inflicted on your family. Instead, you're offering me mercy I never once considered offering your mother." "Maybe that's exactly why the ancient wolf chose me," Elara said, sitting up slowly, her exhaustion now fully catching up with her after the intensity of the confrontation. "Not because I was strong enough to survive what you did to me, but because I refused to let it turn me into you." They remained there for several long minutes, the cold mountain wind carrying away the last tension of the confrontation, before the sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of Damien and the warrior he had brought with him, having tracked Elara's path up the mountain once the situation at the settlement had stabilized. "Elara," Damien called out, relief evident in his voice as he took in the scene. Vera subdued but alive, Elara exhausted but unharmed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Elara said, rising slowly to her feet, extending a hand to help Vera up as well, the older woman accepting the gesture with visible surprise. "It's over, Damien. We're bringing her back to face proper judgment." Damien studied the scene for a long moment, clearly processing the restraint Elara had shown in a situation where few would have blamed her for choosing a far harsher resolution. "That's more mercy than most would offer," he said quietly, echoing Vera's own earlier words. "I know," Elara said, watching as the warrior moved to secure Vera properly for the journey back down the mountain. "But my mother deserved justice built on truth, not on becoming exactly what destroyed her in the first place. This is how we honor her, Damien. Not through more violence, but through finally telling the truth in front of the entire pack, and letting real justice take its course." As they began the long descent back toward the settlement below, Vera walking silently between them, Elara felt the weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift, replaced by something she had not expected to feel again, after everything the truth had cost her. A quiet, hard-won sense of peace, built not on vengeance satisfied, but on justice finally within reach. "You have honored your mother's memory well tonight," the ancient wolf said quietly, as they made their way down the mountain path toward the waiting settlement and the long journey home that lay ahead. And you have proven, beyond any doubt that remained, exactly why I searched a century to find you. The journey back to Crimson Moon territory took the better part of 3 days, the small group moving carefully through the mountains with their captive, Vera remaining largely silent throughout the long trek. The fight and calculation that had defined her for so many years finally, visibly exhausted. Callan Voss, recovered enough from his ordeal to travel, walked beside his daughter for much of the journey, and Alara found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, having quiet, honest conversations with her father, about her mother, about the years of silence he had carried out of fear, about the fragile, cautious hope now beginning to take root between them, as old secrets finally lost their power to divide them. Word of their return had clearly traveled ahead of them, because when they finally crossed back into Crimson Moon territory, a significant portion of the pack had gathered near the main gates, drawn by curiosity and the news that the search party had succeeded where so much uncertainty had lingered for days. Alpha Garrick met them personally, his relief at Alara's safe return evident, despite his usual composed bearing, and behind him, Alara caught sight of Bethan, the old elder who had supported her from the very beginning, her weathered face carrying quiet satisfaction at the sight of Vera bound and returned to face proper judgment at last. The formal council hearing was convened 3 days later, once the pack had settled from the immediate aftermath of the search and the lingering effects of the attempted assault on the territory weeks earlier. The chamber was filled beyond its usual capacity. Pack members from every rank gathered to witness a reckoning nearly 2 decades in the making, the story of Alara's suppressed strength and her mother's hidden murder having spread throughout the entire territory in the days since her return. Alara stood before the assembled council, alongside her father and Bethan, presenting the full accumulated evidence one final time, no longer facing the skeptical uncertainty of their first presentation weeks earlier, but an audience already primed by Vera's own flight and capture, to understand the gravity of what had truly occurred. Vera herself stood before the council as well, stripped of the composed authority she had carried for over 2 decades, offering no further deflection or denial, confirming instead, in a quiet, resigned voice, the truth of everything Alara and Damien had painstakingly uncovered. "I do not ask for mercy," Vera said, addressing the assembled council directly, her voice carrying none of the careful manipulation that had once made her such a formidable presence within pack politics. "I have caused harm I can never fully account for, to a family that deserved far better than what I gave them. Whatever judgment this council decides is appropriate, I will accept it without further resistance." The council deliberated for the better part of the afternoon, weighing the severity of murder and attempted murder against decades of otherwise dedicated service, ultimately arriving at a judgment that stripped Vera of all rank and status within the pack, exiling her permanently from Crimson Moon territory, under conditions that ensured she would never again hold position or influence within any recognized pack community. It was not the harshest punishment available under pack law, but it was, Alara understood watching the proceedings conclude, a fitting resolution, justice delivered through proper process, rather than the violence that had defined so much of the preceding weeks. As Vera was led from the chamber under guard, beginning the long walk toward permanent exile, she paused briefly near where Alara stood, meeting her eyes one final time. "Your mother's name deserves to be remembered properly now," she said quietly. "I hope, in time, that matters more to you than anything else this council decided today." Alara watched her go, feeling not triumph, exactly, but something quieter and more complete, the closing of a chapter that had shaped her entire life, long before she ever understood its origins. Alpha Garrick called for the chamber's attention once Vera had been escorted from the grounds entirely, addressing the assembled pack with a formal announcement that carried the weight of long overdue justice finally served. "Let the record show," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowded chamber, "that Miriam Voss, wrongfully accused of no wrongdoing and denied the recognition her strength and character deserved throughout her life, is hereby restored to full honor within this pack's history. Her daughter, Alara Voss, chosen by the Ancient Wolf and proven beyond doubt through both strength and character, stands as living testament to a legacy this pack should have protected far better than it did." The chamber erupted into applause. The same pack members who had once mocked Alara as the weakest wolf in a century, now offering genuine, unreserved respect, and Alara felt the weight of years of humiliation and doubt finally, completely lifting, replaced by something she had not dared to hope for during the long, difficult weeks since the bonding ceremony had first upended her entire understanding of herself. The weeks following the council's judgment brought a kind of quiet transformation to Crimson Moon Pack that Alara could not have imagined during those early days of hauling water and mending clothes, invisible to a community that had never once thought to look closer at the girl they dismissed as the weakest wolf in a century. Pack members who had barely acknowledged her existence now greeted her with genuine warmth as she crossed the training grounds each morning. Younger wolves, curious about the legendary strength now openly recognized as hers, began seeking her out for guidance, eager to understand the bond that had transformed her so completely. Her father, Callan Voss, found his own quiet restoration within the pack as well, the shadow of disgrace that had followed their family for 18 years, finally lifting alongside the truth of Miriam's death. He resumed a position of modest respect among the pack's council advisors, no longer defined by the whispered speculation that had shaped so much of Alara's childhood, but by his own steady wisdom and the quiet courage he had finally found to speak the truth after so many years of fearful silence. Alara's training with Damien continued through those weeks as well, though its purpose had shifted considerably from the desperate work of dissolving a hidden barrier towards something closer to genuine partnership, two people learning to understand each other alongside the strength that bound their futures together, by tradition, and, increasingly, by choice rather than obligation alone. "You've gotten faster," Damien observed one afternoon, watching Alara complete a complex sparring sequence with a fluid confidence that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. "I've had a good teacher," Alara said, lowering her stance and studying him with newfound ease, the careful distance that had once defined their interactions, long since replaced by something warmer and more genuine. "I think you've had good instincts all along," Damien said. "You simply needed the chance to use them without 18 years of interference standing in the way." They had grown close over the weeks since the confrontation on the mountain, their partnership built not on the tradition that had initially thrown them together, but on the genuine respect and understanding forged through shared crisis and careful, patient work toward a common goal. Alara found herself, increasingly, looking forward to their training sessions, not simply for the continued development of her strength, but for the quiet companionship that had grown between them, a friendship that carried the unmistakable warmth of something deeper, slowly taking root. "You are happier than I have sensed you since our bonding began," the ancient wolf observed one evening, as Alara sat alone near the edge of the training grounds, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and violet. "I think I finally understand what you meant," Alara said quietly, "about strength meaning more than simply surviving difficulty. For so long, I thought becoming stronger meant proving everyone wrong about who I was. Now I think it means something different. Building something worth having, rather than just proving I deserved what I never received. That understanding will serve you well," the ancient wolf said, warmth evident in its ancient voice, both as Luna and as whatever else you choose to become in the years ahead. The formal ceremony recognizing Alara as Crimson Moon Pack's Luna took place several weeks later, a celebration that drew wolves from across the region, curious to witness the culmination of a story that had spread throughout the territory in the months since the ancient wolf's unexpected choice. The training grounds where she had once hauled water buckets in silent humiliation now blazed with torches and celebration. The entire pack gathered to honor a transformation few would have believed possible when the ceremony first began. Alara stood at the center of the celebration, dressed in fine clothing that felt strange against skin, still more accustomed to the rough, practical garments of her old life, watching the pack she had once served invisibly, now gathered to celebrate everything she had become. Bethan stood nearby, having earned a place of particular honor for her early, steadfast support, her weathered face carrying quiet pride as she watched the ceremony unfold. Her father stood close as well, finally free of the fear and guilt that had shadowed him for 18 years, his expression carrying the unmistakable pride he had always felt, but had been too burdened by secrecy to fully express. Alpha Garrick addressed the gathered crowd as the formal ceremony began, his voice carrying clearly across the celebrating grounds. "Nearly 2 months ago, this pack witnessed a choice none of us fully understood, a legendary spirit selecting a vessel we believed unworthy of such honor, based on assumptions built on incomplete truth and cruel manipulation we did not yet recognize for what it was. Tonight, we correct that failure of understanding completely. Alara Voss has proven herself, not simply through the strength granted by her bond, but through character, forged in circumstances that would have broken someone with less resilience, less wisdom, and less commitment to genuine justice over easy vengeance. He turned to Alara directly, his expression carrying the weight of formal recognition, long overdue. Let this pack formally recognize Alara Voss as Luna, of Crimson Moon Pack, chosen by the Ancient Wolf, proven through trial and sacrifice, and welcomed now, not out of obligation to tradition, but out of genuine respect, earned through everything she has overcome, and everything she has chosen to become. The pack's response carried none of the skepticism that had marked her earlier confirmation weeks before, a genuine, thunderous acknowledgement that settled something deep and long unresolved within Alara's chest, the final acceptance of a place within her own community that she had once believed would never truly be hers. Damien stepped forward as the formal recognition concluded, extending his hand toward her with a warmth that carried none of the reluctant obligation their earlier interactions had once held. "I know tradition brought us together initially," he said, his voice carrying only for her amid the celebrating crowd. "But I find myself grateful for that tradition now, not because it demanded this partnership, but because it gave me the chance to discover exactly who you truly are." "I feel the same," Alara admitted, accepting his hand, the warmth between them no longer requiring the careful distance either of them had once maintained. "Whatever brought us together, I'm glad it did." The celebration continued long into the night, the entire pack gathered in genuine joy, rather than the cautious obligation that had marked her bonding ceremony weeks earlier. Alara moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from wolves who had once mocked her, offering genuine forgiveness where forgiveness felt appropriate, understanding that the transformation of an entire community's perception took time and patience. She was finally, fully prepared to offer. Nadia approached late in the evening, her expression carrying a mixture of lingering awkwardness and genuine, hard-won humility. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, standing before Alara without the usual confidence that had once defined her cruelty. "For years of unkindness that I told myself was simply honest assessment. I was wrong about you, Alara, in ways I'm only now beginning to understand fully." "Thank you for saying that," Alara said, and found, to her genuine surprise, that she meant the forgiveness she offered in return, understanding at last that holding on to every old grievance would serve her far less than choosing, deliberately, to build something better with the community she now led. As the celebration finally began winding down, Alara found herself standing once again near the edge of the training grounds, looking out over the territory that had shaped every difficult, transformative moment of her recent life. Damien joined her there, the two of them standing quietly together, as the last of the torches burned low and the stars emerged fully across the clear night sky. "What happens now?" Alara asked quietly, more to herself than to him, though he answered regardless. "Now," Damien said, "we build whatever comes next, together. A pack strengthened by truth rather than convenient lies. A partnership built on genuine respect rather than obligation. Whatever challenges come our way, and I suspect there will be more, given everything we've already faced, we face them as equals, the way this entire journey has taught us to." "He speaks wisely," the Ancient Wolf offered quietly, its presence settling into the comfortable, permanent rhythm that had become as familiar to Alara now as her own heartbeat. "You have proven, beyond any doubt a century of waiting could have demanded, exactly why patience and resilience matter more than raw, untested strength alone. Whatever comes next, Alara, I am honored to face it bonded to you." Alara looked out over the celebrating grounds, at the pack that had once called her the weakest Luna candidate in a century, now gathered in genuine celebration of everything she had overcome, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, the complete and unshakable certainty that she belonged exactly where she stood, not because tradition or legend had decided it for her, but because she had earned that place through every difficult, painful, transformative step of the journey that had brought her here. The weakest Luna, the pack had once called her, mockery dressed up as simple, dismissive fact. Standing now beneath the stars, bonded to a legend a century in the waiting, surrounded by a community finally seeing her clearly, Ilara understood at last that the pack had been wrong about her from the very beginning, not because her strength had always been hidden waiting to be revealed, but because true strength had never been about power alone. It had been about surviving every reason the world gave her to break, and choosing, again and again, not to. And in that quiet, hard-won understanding, Ilara Voss finally, completely, became exactly who the ancient wolf had always known she could be. The following morning, before the pack had fully stirred from the celebration's late hours, Ilara made her way alone to a quiet grove at the edge of the territory, a place she had visited only rarely as a child, where a simple stone marker bore her mother's name beneath a canopy of old, sheltering trees. She knelt before it now, tracing the weathered engraving with careful fingers, feeling the weight of everything the past 2 months had revealed, settling into something closer to peace than the grief she had carried for so long. "I wish you could have seen this," she said quietly, the words carrying easily in the still morning air. "All of it, the truth finally coming out, the pack finally understanding what you always deserved. I hope, wherever you are, you know it happened. I hope you know I didn't let them keep believing the lie." "She would be proud of you," the ancient wolf said gently, its presence settling warmly around the quiet grief still lingering beneath Ilara's hard-won peace, not simply for uncovering the truth, though that mattered greatly, but for the person you chose to become while uncovering it. Many would have let anger consume them entirely. "You did not." "I almost did," Ilara admitted. "On that mountain, when I had her at the edge of that drop, some part of me wanted to let her fall. But you did not," the ancient wolf reminded her. "That choice, more than any strength I granted you, is what makes you worthy of everything this pack now offers you." Ilara remained at the grove a while longer, watching the early morning light filter through the trees, before making her way back toward the territory's heart, where the pack was slowly waking to the first full day of her formal recognition as Luna. Damien met her partway along the path, having apparently guessed where she might have gone, and fell into step beside her without needing explanation. "Better?" he asked simply. "Better," she confirmed, and found, walking beside him toward the pack that had finally, fully accepted her, that the word carried more truth than it had in longer than she could remember. Life within Crimson Moon Pack settled, in the months that followed, into a new and steadier rhythm, one built on the hard-won truths that had reshaped nearly everything Ilara once believed about herself and her place within the community that had raised her. She took her responsibilities as Luna seriously, working alongside Damien and his father to strengthen the pack's defenses against the kind of opportunistic threats that had tested them so severely during the weeks following the bonding ceremony, and to ensure that the kind of hidden cruelty Vera had practiced for 2 decades could never again take root so easily within their leadership. She thought often, in quiet moments, of Ren, the ancient wolf's previous vessel, whose fierce, reckless courage had cost her everything decades earlier, and found herself grateful, again and again, for the careful patience her own difficult childhood had taught her. Patience that had ultimately saved not only her own life, but her father's as well, and had allowed justice to be served through truth, rather than through the kind of unchecked violence that might otherwise have consumed everyone involved. The pack that had once called her the weakest Luna in a century now told a different story entirely, one that traveled beyond Crimson Moon's own borders, as word spread throughout the region of the remarkable vessel the ancient wolf had chosen after a century of careful waiting. Ilara understood, standing now at the center of a life she could never have imagined during those long years of quiet humiliation, that the story was far from finished, that new challenges would inevitably arise, and that the bond she carried would continue to be tested in ways neither she nor the ancient wolf could yet fully predict. But for the first time in her entire life, she faced that uncertain future not with the resigned expectation of continued disappointment, but with the steady, hard-won confidence of someone who had already proven, beyond any doubt the world could offer, exactly what she was capable of becoming.